Good evening and welcome to the July 16th edition of the Downers Grove Village Council. Mayor Barnett is homeward bound but will not be joining us tonight, so it will just be the six of us. Would you please rise and join us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Rosa, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Barnett. Commissioner Jose.
Here.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit.
Here.
Commissioner Gilmartin.
Here.
Commissioner Glover.
Here.
Commissioner Tully.
Here.
Commissioner Davenport.
Here.
Thank you, Rosa. Item 3 is the minutes. Is there a motion?
Mayor Pro Tem, I move to adopt the Village Council meeting minutes from July 9th, 2024 as presented.
Second.
Any comments, questions, or corrections from members of the council? Any public comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Those are adopted unanimously. That brings us to item 4, public comments. Oh, I'm sorry.
I do them separately. Mayor Pro Tem, I move to adopt the executive session meeting minutes from July 9th, 2024.
Second.
Any comments, questions, or corrections with regard to the executive session minutes now that I have been corrected with regard to the adoption thereof? All right. Hearing none, roll call, please.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit.
Aye.
Commissioner Gilmartin.
Aye.
Commissioner Davenport.
Aye.
Commissioner Tully.
Aye.
Commissioner Glover.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Jose.
Aye. Those are adopted unanimously. That brings us to item 4, public comments. Before we get started, a bit of an editorial comment. Mayor Barnett usually has an intro here that I'm not going to repeat, but our nation suffered an act of violence over the weekend with the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. And regardless of your politics or what you think of his politics, it was an act of violence on the entire country. Abraham Lincoln reminded us that among free men, there can be no appeal from the ballot to the bullet, and those who take such appeal are sure to lose their case and pay the costs. We don't yet know what the reason behind the assassination attempt was, but we do know that the rhetoric in this country has been heated, to say the least, for quite some time, the better part of the last 8 years. We don't have the ability to necessarily affect the nationwide discourse, but we can do better about how we treat each other locally. There's too much dehumanizing, there's too much demonizing in today's political arena, and I hope that all of us will do what we can to dial the temperature down in our comments, and hopefully others will around the nation. And in doing so, perhaps we can bring about the change collectively, bit by bit. So with that, I will open public comment. Anyone with anything to say with regard to items that are not on tonight's agenda?
Clorinda Greco, 38 years in business here in Downers Grove. Last week, I think the gentleman showed you or told you about some pictures that we did receive through the Guiding Downers Grove. And I know after we get up here and we speak, sometimes you guys comment afterwards. And so the pictures that we were provided were of the parking be eliminated from Main Street. So just so you understand that that is what we were given by the company that was hired to felicitate, however you want to expand the outdoor dining. So I just want to say, every time we seem to speak, then we're corrected afterwards that no decisions have been made, no drawings, no this, no that. That is what we were provided. And so that's all we can go on, because we were provided pictures of alleyways that were converted for outdoor dining. We weren't provided pictures of empty lots that were turned into outdoor dining. That's what we were given. And since you brought that up, that's kind of why I think we get a little upset when we're corrected on something that it's not false. That's what we were told, and that's the pictures that we were giving and the drawings that we were giving when we attended these meetings. Multiple times I've heard about the parking study that was originally done in 2011 and updated in 2019. Part of that study was, the challenge was balancing desirable parking for downtown Downers Grove, for mixed use of retail services, offices, entertainment, civic, religious, etc. Out of that survey, 1,606 people participated in it. 79% of the people said there's insufficient parking. There's a lot of other statistics on there, but they also stated that the amount of parking for Marquee and the amount of parking for, I hate reading from stuff, the Burlington apartments are insufficient. Maple and Main are the only ones that have any additional parking, and that was 2 spaces inside their parking facility for the residents. For a guest, they're short 10 spots. This is all in the survey. And that's Maple and Main. The Marquee is short 11, plus 5 for the residents. And the Burlington Station is short 4 for the residents and 7 for their guests. That's how much they're short. It also states that for the restaurants, just the 9 restaurants on Main Street between Burlington and Maple, if you were going to use the restaurant, whatever numbers they came up with, you would need to provide 485 parking spots for those restaurant employees and their customers. That's just for those restaurants. That doesn't include Wasabi. It doesn't include Bar Cheadle. It doesn't include Cadence. It doesn't include Egg Harbor. It doesn't include the new one that's opening up by Wasabi. There just seems to be an extreme shortage. They also said that in order to build a facility, the only spot that they had available, according to the study, would be in the library parking lot. And that would only build 260 spots. That's on page 37. At $49,000 a parking spot. And it would be a low building. I don't know if they thought of going underground, but they didn't want to make it too high. 260 spots at $49,000 a parking spot. If you are going to be removing parking spots to make the street wider on a permanent basis, I think you need to tackle the parking issue. Yes, in the study it said there was sufficient parking 25% of the time between 12 and 1. Well, I think that's really funny that those parking pictures were taken on a Saturday afternoon at 12:30 in the afternoon on a Saturday. They were showing pictures of the empty lots that are available. They also said that the Civic Center has parking for up to 98 spaces. Are there going to be 98 spaces available at the new Civic Center parking lot? They also said that we should reach out to AT&T building to use their parking. That was done in the survey in 2011. My understanding is the senior center, the senior living reached out to them because they don't have enough parking. Something happened and they don't want to do it anymore. They were letting them do it. It also said that where Dash is built, that we should be using that church parking lot. I don't know if I'm up to my 5 minutes, but that church parking lot isn't there anymore. It also said we should reach out to the other churches and use their parking lot. We don't know if they're going to have a funeral during the day. You can't let people permit park there. You can only do it maybe if it's empty after a certain time. But I really think that survey that was done in 2011 and updated in 2019 really needs to be looked at again, because there's a lot of problems and errors in that, according to what we have going on right now in town. Thank you.
Thank you. I would only remind you that consultants are just that, as I said last week, consultants. We haven't even been presented with the picture that you talked about potentially blocking off all the parking on Main Street. Well, the decisions get made here, not out at a meeting with the consultant out on Main Street.
The pictures are in the kickoff materials, so you can find them anywhere you want, anytime you want to look. So, and I've got copies, so I'll be happy to share them.
One of many concepts, Janet. Good evening. One of many concepts. Good evening.
I really wanted to like the parking study. I can't. The existing condition report clearly identifies two major strengths of the community. By far, they are the character of the community and the library. There's huge satisfaction with the community character and appeal, the community friendliness, the community appearance, and the community image and reputation. Almost 95% of the respondents said they were satisfied or very satisfied with the quality of life in the community. By this measure, there isn't any need for enhancement or improving the welcoming nature of the community or the goals of these plans. It ain't broke. You don't need to fix it. By far, the biggest asset of the community in the village is the nationally recognized top-class library. The library is one of the premier gathering spaces, and the study highlights as a desirable attribute for the village. The village should be enhancing access and available parking for the library, not permanently removing and eliminating parking for outdoor dining a few hours a year. When it comes down to it and you add it up, it's a few hours a year. And Clarinda already mentioned the 485 parking spaces that would be needed for zoning compliance in 2019 on Main Street. The top identified weakness is parking availability or lack of it. In this current studies, that number, I believe, is 41%. By way of comparison, during the discussion on the bike plan last week, a response of 20% interest was high enough to be called significant. And Mayor Pro Tem, you pointed out the village could use condemnation powers to force recalcitrant homeowners to grant rights of way to bikers across their property. That was a significant discussion. In this case, respondents double that number for material concerns that are being ignored. The current proposal to discuss permanently removing some parking spaces to widen sidewalks and enhance outdoor dining will necessarily put pressure on the library lot. That's where displaced parkers will go. That will impinge on accessibility for library patrons, many of whom are seniors and don't walk 6 minutes to the library, which is supposedly what is supposed to be acceptable. Moms with toddlers who want to come to the story hour, and others who just have the right to enjoy the library. What you decide will affect the library, and yet there's no serious discussion of the library or inadequate parking in any of the reports or the studies. The controlling document on parking is the 2019 study. It is the basis for a lot of the comments that you all make. The study is out of date and, in my opinion, is disingenuous and built on faulty assumptions. It needs to be replaced with a current study that addresses the concerns of Downers Grove residents and conducted by a different consultant. The study was done before Marquee was fully sold and Dash was not yet built. The Baptist Church still owned the surface lot. The study includes private parking lots as a source of public parking. The pool of available parking in the study is artificially high. The parking area was gerrymandered to include the AT&T lot, which of course is private. In this study, almost 80% of the respondents said that in 2019 that there was not enough publicly available parking for customers and visitors. This is before Dash, before COVID, and the institution of outdoor dining. Comments on the parking study survey responses include a number of statements reflecting dissatisfaction with parking that impinges on the library. One mom said she won't take her toddler to the library anymore because of the lack of parking. Seniors express similar frustrations. We know from the guiding DG studies that the fastest growing demographic is seniors who need convenient parking. You should be serving these constituents, not making access more difficult. In its own words, the study recognized that many respondents expressed dissatisfaction and frustration with the parking system. The parking consultant's answer was generally tell them to get used to it. This is the level of service that you get. Discussion of parking available to residents in the multifamily business building says that there's adequate parking for these residents, but that is a false and based on flawed reasoning. The residents in these buildings demand more parking than is available to them, and the consultant's answer for them is to rent spaces in the garage, what the study calls Lot R. The study recommends that Lot R parking should be expanded for the apartment dwellers. This is before the village gave a pass to Pierce Tavern for 10 spaces in the garage. Why are taxpayers subsidizing these commercial buildings? The buildings are underparked. They don't provide enough parking for their residents or their own staffs. In fact, I believe it was Maple on Main, staff parks in the garage because they don't give them parking. The study compares downtown Downers Grove with Oak Brook Center, as has often been cited by council members as justification for ignoring residents' concerns and demands for better parking. This is a false comparison on its face. People don't go to the mall for the same reasons they go to downtown. And except for Christmas, you can generally find a park and closer than 6 minutes away from the store that you want to go to. I urge the council to listen and heed the residents who tell you their parking for the library and other stores and businesses is a major issue and should take precedence over outdoor dining in a few restaurants for a few hours a year. You should address parking in your studies, and you need to update the parking study and replace it with an honest and objective study that addresses public parking, not private parking, and does not reserve parking in the garage for private individuals who should be parking in their buildings, not taking away parking that's available for the public in a garage that the taxpayers paid for. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments of a general nature? Please.
Hi, excuse me. Hi, my name is Carissa Doherty, and for the last 6 years, I've had the pleasure of serving as the village as part of the Downers Grove Library Board of Trustees. As I reach the end of my appointed term, and as you all make deliberations on who will fill my seat on the board, I wanted to take a few minutes and share some thoughts that I hope might carry at least a little bit of weight in your discussions going forward. First, I wanted to say that while serving on the board has at times been challenging, I've learned a lot. And I've gained a massive appreciation for the roles that you and other public figures have played in shaping civic life in our community. I didn't volunteer for the board because of a political agenda, or because I like speaking in public, or because I wanted to pad my resume. I volunteered because I wanted to give back to our community and lend my time and talents to an organization, the Downers Grove Public Library, that I care very deeply about. There have been several things that have happened in the last few years that I maybe naively never expected as a member of the Board of Trustees. Being accused of being a Marxist, being offered the option of a police patrol at my home, and seeing firsthand over and over how both unintentional and deliberate misinformation is eroding trust in our community. Through all of this, has really struck me how a simple statement or fact can be interpreted in so many different ways, which I'm sure is old news to all of you, but something that I'd not really taken so seriously before, and that will stay with me after my term ends next month. I've actually been inspired, once my public role as trustee has ended, to think more about how we as citizens can work together to change the political atmosphere, to make it less polarizing and more empathetic, inclusive, and oriented toward collaborative problem solving. I really loved your statements, Mayor Pro Tem, to start off the public comment, but I'll have to disagree with you on one point. I actually do think there are ways for those of us, private citizens, and even those of us on local government, to make a difference. It might be more slow, it might be more nuanced, it might be more subtle, but I really think that's important. It's something that I'm hoping to potentially work with any of you and anyone in our community on that in the future. And I just can't state enough how grateful I am for the experiences on the board that have led me to this point, and particularly to the mayor for appointing me all these years ago. And that leads me to my second point. There have been some calls to change the way the board is selected, to move away from an appointed system to one where trustees are elected. Now, I know there's a lot of things kind of in the way of that and administrative details, but I wanted to say something about that potential change. While an election process is certainly more common in Illinois, I have mixed feelings about it. It would definitely add a level of direct accountability to our fellow citizens, which I think we can all agree is a good thing. The downside, however, and maybe you can all appreciate this having gone through campaigns yourself, is that the election process nowadays may actually exclude some folks who really should have their voices heard. We may not, for example, get the benefit of perspectives of those of us who are more introverted, who don't love the spotlight, or who don't have political ambitions. We might also lose the benefit of hearing from people without the privileges of time or the finances to pursue a campaign. For better or for worse, I don't know if I would have stepped forward to put myself through an election, not because I don't believe in accountability, but because I just don't think I could stomach it, especially in this social climate. So I definitely admire you all for doing that. It's really impressive, and I have a newfound appreciation for anyone serving an elected office. But in terms of the library board, I'm not sure it's the best way to ensure diverse representation from all of our constituents. Finally, I have a request that among the other factors and perspectives you're considering when looking for a new trustee, that you consider what I'll call socioeconomic diversity. I would argue that one's experience of civic life is colored by their economic status, and that a lot of that we're doing at the library could really be more inclusive and more useful if we had decision makers who were, for example, just starting out their careers, who live in more economical homes, which are disappearing in Downers Grove, and who are facing real hardship in our relatively affluent community. And if that brings with it diversity of age, of race, of political affiliation, then all the better. Maybe this point is moot. I know you had interviews with other candidates for the last board appointment, and maybe you have another person already waiting in the rings, which would be great. But in any case, I appreciate all of the time that you've spent discussing and deliberating on trustee appointments, and I trust that you'll find someone who will work with my board colleagues with respect and candor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments and for your service to our library and our community. Any other comments of a general nature? Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening. David Rose, still. I'm here to second the comments by residents criticizing council's handling of public comments, to which I would add its handling of e-remarks, and they're questioning the consultant's claim the guiding Downers Grove process is going well. With respect to the public comments at meetings, council's enforcement of the 5-minute time limit gives the appearance of wanting public participation without the substance. This is particularly problematic in the case of complex subjects about which a motivated resident is often more informed than council members, and thus for which members have no good response justifying their decision. A notably egregious example of the problem occurred when Marshall Schmidt was forced to attend multiple meetings in order to give 5-minute chunks of explanation that demonstrated the illogic of council's decision to change the language of an ordinance in order to avoid being sued by the developer who won the bid for the Longfellow property. Schmidt had pointed out at a cooperative council meeting that village ordinances precluded the developer building as many individual properties as he anticipated, hence the need for the council to change the language. In effect, the amount of the winning bid compared to the other bids made sense only if the bidder had been led to believe he would be able to build more units. Neither Jose nor Burnett attended that coffee gathering, as I recall, I presume because neither wanted to face the group of angry neighbors opposed to tearing down the school building and cutting down the 100-year-old oaks after the neighborhood's opposition failed to persuade DG 58's board to keep the property in public hands. Schmidt was so outraged he ran for mayor. Sadly, by my take, he lost. We've seen similar treatment of resident comments in other debates, including the one over Forest Avenue traffic issues. The Longfellow case demonstrated council also will change the agenda order so that public comments come later in the meeting, a tactic mimicking the school district's approach. Unfortunately, residents have yet to unite and change the composition of council and the rules by which it operates. I've personally experienced this treatment during the course of my multi-year effort to have council take its goal of environmental sustainability seriously. I recall particularly the instance years ago of remarks I knew went well beyond 5 minutes that I planned to give at a meeting whose agenda was clearly not going to last more than 30 minutes. Given the claim the time limit was to help ensure meetings ended at a reasonable hour, I was caught by surprise when I was told I had to stop because my time was up. What really was up were council members' attention spans, particularly about a subject they had no interest in. Council's attitude and refusal to engage took the even more troubling form of censoring e-remarks I submitted to the April 6th meeting this year. Those remarks were my report on and reaction to the March meeting of the Environmental Concerns Commission. It was the first ECC meeting with Michnik on staff, but the focus was the ECC members' workshop with the consultants. Apparently my remarks hit a nerve. Why? Was it because I had again called out the fact that Council's definition of environmental sustainability, which the consultants also use, is inadequate. The deception treats sustainability as a synonym for beautification and protection of the physical environment. In so doing, we witness a textbook example of the gaslighting of Americans about what environmental sustainability entails. That gaslighting has been going on since at least the 1970s, motivated primarily by political economic leaders' refusal to accept the implications of the book, Limits to Growth and Related Investigations. Or perhaps someone didn't like my rebranding Greenest Region Compact as greenwashing residents' consciousness, or my observing that defining the goal as reducing the negative impact is not the same as attaining and maintaining a sustainable rate of resource usage. Or perhaps it was my observing that the consultants are often hired to give an imprimatur of expert to politicians' predetermined objectives, which meant my remarks constituted the forbidden act of getting ahead of VC's desired desired narrative. I've observed to VC at previous meetings that its meeting minutes make no mention of your remarks, failing thereby to give them equal status to comments made within meetings. Why is that a problem? Because, as far as I discern, by not doing so, neither the individual commenting nor the subject of the remark can be found easily, because, especially later in time, because the website's search mechanism does not examine the remarks. Regarding the guiding Downers Grove process, let me just say briefly, given the tendency of council meeting minutes and summaries to whitewash or misinterpret public comments, either out of ignorance or by design, as has happened consistently with my comments on sustainability, not having audio and or video records prevents interested residents from assessing for themselves what is being said in gatherings that they do not attend. I also find troubling that stakeholders are treated as privileged participants in the process but are not identified, so residents cannot assess the appropriateness of that status. I'd also note council and consultants behave as if numbers alone constitute useful quantitative data. Some survey questions are so broad and ill-defined, however, one is hard-pressed to interpret the meaning of resident responses to them. Consultants claim the process is going well. How do residents assess the veracity of that claim?
Thank you. Any other comments of a general nature? Okay. Excuse me. That brings us to item 5, the consent agenda. Is there a motion?
Mayor Pro Tem, I move to adopt the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Any public comment with regard to the consent agenda? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit,
Aye.
Commissioner Gilmartin,
Aye.
Commissioner Davenport,
Aye.
Commissioner Tully,
Aye.
Commissioner Glover,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Jose.
Aye, that matter passes unanimously. We have one item on our active agenda. Is there a motion?
Mayor Pro Tem, I move to authorize a contract for Washington Street drainage improvements to Swallow Construction Corporation in the amount of $803,244.75, plus a 5% contingency in the amount of $40,162.24, for a total not to exceed $843,406.99, as presented.
Second.
Any comments from members of the public with regard to item A, the Washington Street drainage project? Any comments from members of the council? Say, let's get it done. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit,
Aye.
Commissioner Gilmartin,
Aye.
Commissioner Davenport,
Aye.
Commissioner Tully,
Aye.
Commissioner Glover,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Jose.
Aye. That matter also passes unanimously. That brings us to item 7, council member reports. This is an opportunity for members of the council to report out on goings-on in the community. I will start to my left with Commissioner Tully. Good evening.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Jose. I have no report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Just a reminder, we have some visioning workshops for Guiding DG. We have one coming up on July 22nd at Downers Grove South at 6:30 p.m. A second one on July 25th, which will be in the committee room of Village Hall. Is this still going to be Village Hall? Here at Village Hall, 2 to 4 o'clock. And then a third one also on July 25th at the Downers Grove Rec Center at 6:30 to 8:30. This is part of our Guiding DG initiative. We're looking for continued feedback. I appreciate anyone and all who can attend. Highly encourage that. I just want to take this opportunity to say goodbye to this seat. This will be, I think, the last time I will be sitting here. I will not be at the August 6th meeting with all of you, but I'm looking forward to the following meeting and being in the new space. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. Commissioner Davenport.
No report, Mayor Pro Tem.
Commissioner Glover.
No report. Thank you, Mayor.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit.
Just a thanks to our Public Works and first responders in dealing with all of this extreme weather that we've been having, and it feels apt that we're talking about our environmental sustainability, existing conditions report at this time. So that is all. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. I'm going to take just a moment. You may have seen a press release from the Village of Downers Grove in the last 24 hours or so with regard to a police incident that took place on the north end of town. In fact, I think it's referred to as Merit. It's thought of commonly as a SWAT team. This one's employed region-wide, was called out here in Downers Grove as the result of a domestic violence situation. Domestic violence rears its ugly head far too often in communities all across the country and unfortunately touched us very recently. If you're someone who needs help, there are places to go. Please, if you know someone that needs help or need help yourself, please ask. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7, 365 days a year in English, Spanish, and 200 other languages through an interpretation service. You can call 1-800-799-7233, or you can text BEGIN, that's B-E-G-I-N as in Nancy, 8288788. Locally, Family Shelter Services offers a wide variety of domestic abuse services, including assistance with orders of protection. You can call 630-469-5650 or visit metrofamily.org/FSSOFMFSD. Please don't ask me to repeat that. The Village of Downers Grove also employs a full-time social worker, and she has a just tremendous understanding of the resources available to people in need. You can call 630-434-6894 to seek help from our social worker. Additional resources are available through the DuPage County Circuit Court, the 18th Judicial Circuit Court, and many, many other places. Please, if you are suffering with domestic violence or the threat of domestic violence, please reach out. There are many, many people ready to help. We are going to take the manager's report, I believe, in its entirety in the committee room. So we'll take a 5-minute recess, and we'll see you all next door. Thanks very much. Welcome back. It is 7:40. We are reconvened in the committee room for the manager's report. I will hand it off to Dave Fieldman.
Thank you. You'll see on tonight's agenda for the manager's report there are 2 items. One is a long-range planning update. It's report number 2. The next is guiding DG, focusing on our environmental sustainability plan. We're going to call an audible today. We're going to do take that out of order because we see so many folks here that I think are interested in the sustainability plan. We're going to jump right to that, and then at the end of the meeting we'll do the LRP discussion, long-range plan discussion. Guiding DG is a combination of multiple projects, starting with the update to our comprehensive plan, but it also includes a bike and pedestrian plan, an enhanced version as directed by council, and then downtown and Fairview area focused streetscapes plan, which includes recommendations for outdoor dining, and an environmental sustainability plan, all working together. We are undertaking all of these projects simultaneously, concurrently, and we put together this visual graphic that shows the timeline and the key meeting dates at which these items will be discussed, not only by the village council, but also by our advisory boards. So tonight we are here, July 16th, and it shows us that at the village council meeting, we will be talking about the environmental sustainability plan existing conditions report. It is my pleasure to introduce our own staff member, Jason Mitchnick, who handles environmental sustainability, and he will also be introducing later in the presentation Jay Womack from GZA, a sub-consultant as part of Guiding DG. Gentlemen.
Thanks, Mitch. Good evening, Council. So I just want to thank Jay and his team at GZA. They put a tremendous amount of effort, hours, to make sure that this existing conditions report for the sustainability plan got done rather quickly to make sure that we stay on time with the other plans. I think it's very important that we're doing those concurrently so that we can kind of see where the synergies and conflicts may exist throughout this planning effort. So we're here to present the sustainability portion of Guiding DG, existing conditions report. Me and Jay are going to tag team the presentation here, but we're going to walk through the sections of the existing conditions report. We're really going to focus on the key takeaways in each one of those and then the issues and opportunities at the end. We really want to hear from council to make sure that all of the information, which there's a considerable amount in this report, that those all lead to the correct takeaways and that the issues and opportunities are appropriate, because this is a foundational document as we get into the rest of the planning effort for the sustainability plan. So I'm going to let Jay kind of talk through the agenda for this evening, and then we'll kind of go back and forth for each section. Jay?
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Glad to be back. As Jason said, we've done a lot of hours to catch up to the teams. There was a small hiccup. We came in a little bit later than everyone else. So project status is that we're almost caught up. I think it was last week or the week before, you had your ECMs presented to you by the other three teams. And so we're here tonight. Spent a lot of time in the village, driving around, walking around, looking, listening, hearing, seeing a lot of things. So hopefully all of those things are reflected. It's not a complete recap of every single thing that's in the village, but it's what I think is important, and it's the things that I look for if I was going to improve where I live. These are the things that I would look for in my village. So the existing conditions memo presentation is going to happen. We're going to go through, as Jason said, we're going to give the highlights, because hopefully you've had a chance to read the report. There's a lot of information in there. We really did try to follow what everyone else was doing, which is to stick to the existing conditions, not make recommendations, not start to allude to any conclusions, but really what are the facts. And that's what we really try to be diligent about. Stick to what we saw and what we heard. We're going to hopefully have a good discussion after this. If there are things in the document that you guys are seeing that you really want to express, I'd love to hear about it. But we'd really love to get your written notes and documentation so that we can take those all in, take a look at them, and make sure that we're updating the ECM accordingly. Does that make sense or sound good? And then we'll talk about next steps, which are pretty much the visioning sessions. So with that, so we developed an outline, or not an outline, but chapters or sections. So we started out with what we heard from a meeting with you guys about a month or so ago, which was, what's the purpose of this plan? So we've got a small piece in here that talks about the purpose of the existing conditions, and then we also started to allude to what will you be getting in the ESP, the Environmental Sustainability Plan. So we started to allude to some of these things. These are all photographs that I've taken personally. Like I said, I've spent a lot of time. Very impressed with some of the existing conditions that I saw. But as the ecologist and the landscape architect, I also saw some things that I think we could improve upon. So those are the things that we're going to start to get into a little bit. Community outreach, this was pretty much before my time, so a lot of it really came from Jason. So he's done it, as you've seen and heard, he's done an amazing job of meeting with people, getting feedback, meeting with kids. I wish I could have been at some of those meetings. I love working with kids as well. He's going to talk a little bit more about the climate risk assessment, the Greenest Region Compact. I'm going to go more into the existing conditions analysis, pieces that are in there, and then Jason will come back with the greenhouse gas inventory, and then we'll talk about the issues and opportunities that we saw and open it up for thoughts and comments. If you've got something as we go through each one of these things, and it's pulling you so strong that you want to say something, please do. We want to make this a back and forth. Great.
Want to touch on this? Or should I jump in?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so as Jay alluded to, this is really just kind of talking about the purpose of the existing conditions report. So the idea here is getting that factual basis for certain components of what we consider sustainability or environmental impact. Allows us to identify trends, potentially gaps, strengths that we can build on and enhance. So the idea here is that the facts, the data that's in this report start to lead to what do we really want to focus on. So some of the goals and establish goals, do additional measure, data analysis, and things like that. So the first meaty section here is the community outreach. So the data that's presented in this section is both a mix of things that were done across all guiding DG plans, including the community survey and some of the workshops that we did with the public. And then there's also some specific outreach for the environmental sustainability plan. And the key takeaways were is that even though back in May when I presented to you and I said, I'd reserved a lot of great things that are happening within the village and within the community, there is still this perceived weakness that people are not aware of some of the good things that are going on. So when in the community survey, that was one of the things that's highlighted when survey takers were asked, what are the current strengths and what are the current weaknesses? The top weakness that was identified in the community survey was sustainability initiatives. One of the other things that we noticed across the survey and some of the workshops are priorities. So when we look at what the top priorities in terms of sustainability were, the community identified things like clean air, clean water, natural resources, the environment, nature, things like that. So there is really kind of a natural resources theme that we can kind of draw to as really the core of environmental sustainability in the community. Climate and clean energy was something that was very important when I met with students, but it was something that when we did look at the community survey and the general population, that was not as important. So there seems to be kind of an age or generational difference in terms of thinking about the importance of clean energy, renewable energy as a priority in the sustainability plan. Sustainability and the environment is something that is hugely important to youth. Meeting with students in the high school and middle school level, this is something that they are passionate about, making sure that their community lives in harmony, that they live in harmony with the environment, and that the community as a whole doesn't have the same impact as it currently does. And the last one was meeting with some of the awesome organizations that we have in the community, Greener Grove and Pierce Downer Heritage Alliance, was around the idea of a culture of environmental stewardship, or lack thereof, and the importance that developing that over time is going to be. This next section is a climate risk assessment. So this is something that was added to the existing conditions report after looking at other sustainability plans that were done around the country. People are looking at climate change, but really the impacts of climate change. How are things going to look 50 years from now, or at the end of this century? How are things going to, how are the weather patterns going to change? So looking at some data that's available through the Chicago Metropolitan Region's Climate Action Plan, as well as the DuPage County Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan, and the data that was made available to us from the team in Argonne, we were actually able to look at the data and make some projections about what climate change is going to do in Downers Grove. And what that looks like is enhanced risk. So higher temperatures, more precipitation, more humidity lead to more severe storms, like we've seen here this week in the community. More excessive heat, a lot more days in the summertime that will have heat indexes over 105, which can be dangerous for vulnerable populations, as well as the enhanced risk for flooding. So as I mentioned, hotter summers. So we're expecting by mid-century to have temperatures with heat index above 105, which is classified as a heat warning, increasing from between 0 and 1 to about 5 by mid-century. We're also expect the winters to get milder. So although that may sound like something that's pleasant, it does have some adverse impacts when we think about it. More frequent freezing and thawing cycles can have an adverse impact on things like our pavement, right? Reduce the longevity of our pavement. So there's going to be potentially some benefits in some areas, but some additional costs in others. As I mentioned, increasing precipitation and risk for flood. And kind of when you put all those together, higher risk, higher insurance premiums, higher infrastructure costs, things like that. This kind of leads up to potentially higher costs for the village and residents in it. This next section is looking at the Greenest Region Compact Framework. So we kind of started to have this conversation back in May, looking at this comprehensive document. As a reminder, this is really intended to be this flexible qualitative tool. So there aren't really hard metrics for us to look at and measure success based on our operations or things that are happening in the community. But what I wanted to do is take the staff report that was done back in 2023 and kind of build on that. So there is a summary of that report in this section and some additional analysis where we took each item, so the actions and strategies that are in the framework itself, and thinking about how those actually line up with village operations and the functions of the village, to see where we potentially have strengths and potential gaps in the functions of the village operations. So again, key takeaways here in this section: context needed. We talked about that back in May. That we generally, the actions of the village do align well with the items that are in the framework. And when we looked at the operational alignment, what you actually find out is that a huge portion of the framework itself really focuses on public relations and external collaboration, things that require partnerships to execute, things that require businesses or members of the community to actually take action towards. One of the weaknesses that we saw was in terms of tracking and evaluations. So actually taking data related to those activities, reporting those out, and then also some of the accreditations that go along with that was an area of weakness. And then the other one is in terms of policy and planning. And this is kind of difficult because this can be something that's relatively simple, and it can be very, very complex. There's a lot of context that needed. And as the conversation back in May alluded to, this is actually where we can start to think about taking the authority of the village and effectuating change in behavior in the community.
All right, so there's quite a bit in this section. It's not based on a hierarchy of importance. It was more just how I kind of set it up, but the ecologist in me put the natural resources first, because I think it's one of the biggest, as you saw from the key takeaway with the public outreach, natural resources is one of the most important aspects. So when I think about natural resources, I break them down into the three main ecotypes that we have in the Midwest: woodlands, prairies, and wetlands. So woodlands incorporate oak woodlands, maple woodlands, forests, anything with a tree canopy of pretty much 50% or greater cover. So that's how I categorize a woodland. Prairies are essentially treeless. They like 8 hours of hot sun. And so the prairie is any type of a wet prairie, dry prairie, mesic prairie. Could be a little bit of a savanna, but a lot of those times I put those underneath the woodland. And then our prairies are usually associated with water, usually the floodplains or wetland that's either constructed, man-made, or natural. So I looked at all of those things as wetlands. And you have a lot. So your majority of your natural areas fall under woodlands by far. That's where your name came from, Downers Grove. I love the story of Mr. Grove and how we picked this area because it had the large bur oaks and the trees that made up the savanna. It's a great story.
Mr. Downer, I think is what it was.
Mr. Downer. Yeah, I'm sorry. So the one thing that I kind of a key takeaway is that you do have a lot of natural areas, but a lot of them are lacking biodiversity. And what I mean by that is that they don't have the species of native plants in them. A lot of it's just due to lack of management, stewardship. They're there, they probably haven't been maintained well, and so they're starting to be overgrown. Even in our oak woodlands, they need a certain amount of sunlight to really make sure that we have oak regeneration and that we've got oak trees. A huge part of that is prescribed fire. So that's one of the main things that we'll talk a little bit more about. But when we take away fire, we lose a lack of our biodiversity because we have a lot of things that shouldn't be in those woodlands and even the prairies and the wetlands. Open space. I was amazed every time I turned a corner. It seemed like there was a little park, there was a bigger park, there was a community park. So almost every single one of them had that same sign in front of it. Downers Grove Park District. The majority of your open space is owned by the Downers Grove Park District. Is that a good thing? Yes, absolutely. They do a great job with programs and so forth. So without jumping ahead, there's a lot of opportunities to really look at that open space within the park district and creating an opportunity of teaming with them somehow. Surface water and waterways, those are your lakes, rivers, and streams. When we think about our rivers and streams, a lot of them course through your natural areas. And unfortunately, because of the amount of shade and the lack of management, they've incised. And a lot of those waterways are suffering because when they incise, it means that they're going down and they're cutting the bank and they're eroding soils. And so I found a lot of places where that's happening. It's a very tough thing to come back from. A lot of it's driven by urban stormwater. It goes into a pipe, it comes out into a local waterway, it's got a lot of energy, it scours, and it's very difficult for our natural systems to maintain or survive that type of velocity of water. So it's purely it's a man-made driven phenomenon that you're not alone in by any means. But it is something that we want to talk more about and see if we can rectify. A lot of our lakes and the lakes are detention basins, and they need artificial aeration in them, which is not sustainable. So that's something that we can talk more about as well. Impermeable surfaces. One of the things that we hear, this is always the push and pull in a community. We want to park in front of the place we want to go have dinner or recreate or go to, but yet that parking is impermeable quite often, and that runoff is hot. It's picked up a lot of surface pollutants, which then move into the storm sewer, which then move into our lakes, rivers, and streams. So there's a catch-22 there. There's a push and pull that's driving each other together. So there's a lot of impermeable surfaces. And impermeable surfaces without tree cover also then start to increase your urban heat island effect. And most people think urban heat island is our big cities, but it's actually our suburbs that are creating those urban heat island. So there's some opportunities there to improve that situation. Canopy cover is probably one of your greatest assets. You guys have amazing trees. I was just blown away every time I turn the corner. There's a gigantic oak in someone's yard. There's some in the parkways, but they're mostly on private property. They're well defined within the system for your canopy cover. The downside is that some of them are invasive trees, like Norway maples. Even when I was a young landscape architect, Norway maples were the tree to plant because they could survive our urban tolerance. And they are very destructive because they escape into the wild, they create too much shade, and then they obliterate out the native wildflowers and a lot of the things in our woodlands. Green infrastructure, you guys have a lot of great green infrastructure. I would turn the corner and there was an entire street made out of permeable pavers. Like, that's awesome. I met a gentleman who owns a church who has an entire parking lot made out of permeable pavers. The high school has an entire parking lot made out of permeable pavers. There's bioswales. There's a lot of new great things at your new village hall that we'll be proud of and want to showcase. So green infrastructure is something to be very, very proud of. And I think we can continue to move that forward and really make that a positive within the village, which then goes right to the heart of impermeable surfaces, surface water and waterways, and open space. So a lot of these have commonalities that can be linked to one another to help each other. Solid waste and recycling is something that we looked at, and one of the things that I found was Republic is your waste carrier. For some reason, I was under the impression that you still had an open landfill, but you don't. They've all been closed, and now those carriers go outside of either the county or even the state. depending on the rates for waste. So landfills and waste, solid waste and recycling will become an issue at some point. Right now, it's not, but it's something we want to be proactive about, think about, and make sure that we can do something so that we don't overtax the landfills and then have to surcharge people a tremendous amount of money. So those are most, or if not all, of the existing conditions. These are the key takeaways. There are some things where I put maps into your packets, like for 303D compared waterways. You do have a couple of them based on urban runoff. So a lot of these are linked together one way or another. But I think they also offer some great opportunities to improve the environment.
The second to last section, at least data-heavy section, was the greenhouse gas inventories. So there's an inventory for both the community and the village operations. There's a couple of themes that we see across both of those. First is the energy consumption that comes from buildings. So the buildings are the largest source of emissions in the community and for the village. This is pretty standard across the country. So this is electricity and natural gas for heating. At the community level, the largest, when we split up all the categories, the largest source was non-residential electricity. So this is one of those things like here, the large cluster of Class A office buildings here in the community that are an asset. Some of the larger institutions like our schools, university, hospitals, those are large energy users as buildings. The second largest category was commuting, so transportation, especially passenger vehicles. Solo drivers accounted for the second largest source of emissions at the community level. Interestingly, when we start to compare greenhouse gas emissions at the community level to other DuPage County communities, Downers Grove falls kind of right there in the middle between the average and the median. At a household level, completely even with the U.S. national average as well. And then when we turn to the village operations, this is one of those things that I pointed out back in May, but I still find really surprising, is the largest source of emissions for village operations are streetlights and traffic lights. And then also, surprisingly, the Curtis Street parking deck is also a really heavy user of electricity, which when you do the equivalency is about 106 homes. One of the things to look at too is the energy consumption from this building and our police department. Those are the largest kind of collective source in terms of facilities. Moving into the Civic Center is going to have a pretty substantial impact on the greenhouse gas emissions for the village operations. So it's going to be both exciting in terms of seeing that difference, but then also in terms of goal setting. That's taking a big chunk out of emissions for any target that the village may set. Another one is biofuels. The village and its fleet for about 20 years now has used biodiesel. Biodiesel is kind of interesting, even though it produces tailpipe emissions the same way that diesel does, because it's made from a plant source. They don't measure it the same way. What that ended up doing is reducing the fleet emissions by about 8%, which I thought was very interesting, something to consider, especially for heavier vehicles that aren't good candidates for electrification moving forward yet. So this last section is kind of taking all those key takeaways and trying to kind of tie a thread through all the sections and come up with some themes. So this is what Jay and I have come up with, is kind of these themes. So the first one is natural resources. So that's something that the community cared about in terms of kind of a theme, as well as all the things that Jay just pointed out in the existing conditions that are assets here in the community. So we think that potentially this is an opportunity for kind of a core of the goal setting and theme of the environmental sustainability plan. Open spaces and natural areas, as Jay alluded to, this is an asset in the community. There's opportunities to enhance it, thinking about not just open space, but natural areas versus active recreation areas. There's a difference between those two. One of the really important things that we heard in the community conversations that we've had is not just considering all open space equal, that we need to actually think about its impact on the environment. The other one is private property. Because of the built-out nature of Downers Grove, achieving things in the community is going to take action by property owners. That the village cannot do it all. It is not going to have a tremendous impact on in terms of our environmental impact, to reducing that without participation from residents, business owners, and property owners moving forward. Looking at the future potential risk of climate change, continuing to build on the strength that we have in our emergency management and planning to build resilience and preparedness for some of the things that are coming in the future. And then looking at buildings, again, these are the largest source of emissions. So thinking about energy efficiency programs, not just in the village facilities, but also how we can help facilitate those in the community. And then also potentially the opportunity to investigate things like renewable energy sources for the community as well. Contracted services, so this is another area looking at the services of the village, the functions of the village, where there's potential to effectuate some change to thinking about procurement and the services that the village does procure annually. Another really big one, again, outreach and public engagement. So looking at the GRC framework, a huge portion of it requires external collaboration, participation within the community. So building that culture of environmental stewardship with some strategic partnerships, organizations in the community is something to consider. And then thinking about conscious consumption and reducing waste, as Jay just alluded to. And the last one is from the streetlights. This is an opportunity not just to investigate reducing emissions from that, but also reducing light pollution, which is something that also came up in the existing conditions section of the report. So with that, that kind of concludes our summary of the report. So some basic discussion questions just to kind of get the ball rolling is, again, we want to make sure that the key takeaways that we presented to you are appropriate, because this is that foundational document that we use for the rest of the planning process. And then kind of those themes that tie all the key takeaways together. Do you think that as council that they're appropriate, that we can take this to the ECC and continue working on the next phases of the environmental sustainability plan? And then also, if there's any questions that you have specifically to some of the data points in the report, we'd like to hear about those as well.
Very good. Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Jay. That's a great summary of a long and very interesting document. I just want to start by thanking you for all the work that went into it. I particularly like that we've identified already the I think the most important community groups and reached out to them, and then the outreach into the high schools as well, I think is fantastic. So thank you for all the work that went into this. All right, who wants to kick it off? Commissioner Sadowski, if you could.
I'll have things to say. In terms of, I'll kind of go section by section. So just in the first section, the community engagement, one thing that I mean, we can't get at right now, but I would be interested to know is, the difference in concern over climate and its impacts between the different age groups. I mean, if I were to guess, I would assume it's because the younger people are going to have to cope with the decisions that we're going to make once they become adults. So I just don't want to minimize, the view of the young folks who are going to be the ones who are going to inherit whatever it is that, we're going to be handing them. So I just found that a little bit interesting. Moving on to page 24, kind of that flooding map, especially given, I know on our Monday call we talked about how our, whatever that FEMA rating is, improved a little bit because of some of the stormwater improvements that we've been making in the village. I would be interested to know, we see a little bit of the surrounding area outside of Downers Grove, but it would be interesting to see us in comparison with some of our surrounding municipalities to see how we're doing, especially knowing that collaboration is going to be key. It would be interesting to see if we're kind of in the same area, and that might help us guide more conversations about things that we could be doing together. I appreciate that thoughtfulness in the GRC section about the need for collaboration, because realistically, I mean, climate is, global. So we have to be able to collaborate with folks in order to move the needle on any of these issues. So I'm glad that was called out, and I really don't think that could be understated enough. Another point that I kind of see that starts in this section, this GRC section, and kind of moves throughout, and this is actually something that I think we need to put in that ending issues and opportunities, is around policy. You know, when you look at the GRC and we kind of think about some of the things that we're lacking, a lot of it is policy, whether it be incentivizing, you know, renewables or whatever the case may be. I think there are some spaces in terms of our municipal code and policy that we should be looking at as well. So I don't have a specific statement for what we should be putting in the issues and opportunities, but I think that that whole policy municipal code area needs to be a heavy focus as well, because that's something that we actually do have a lot of control over. Moving on, just, you know, one note on that page 37, the open and green space. We see there are a lot of kind of park district areas, but it does strike me that we really could do more with open space, green space, and naturalized areas. So that was just a little keynote that I had, and I appreciated the map and the fact that it breaks out between forest preserves, village, sanitation. So that was a nice map, and I appreciated that. One question I had was on page 44. We mentioned that we have approximately 4,000 acres of impermeable cover, and research has shown that impervious surfaces in excess of 10% can have a negative impact. I would like a quick statement there about what 4,000 acres is in terms of the percentage. I'm sure I could look that up myself, but it would be nice to have it kind of right there when we talk about those things, to see where we are both now and to give folks who are, you know, councils down the road an idea of what we need to be doing to be preserving our environmental health. As I continue on in this section, the green infrastructure, page 49, it's just another point where it feels like we're lacking in green infrastructure, right? So again, not having as much of the thinking about renewables and some other things you see on the map there, that there's limited spaces where we have permeable pavers and naturalized detention basins and bioswales. I'm sure there's more that we could talk about there with regard to, again, using solar or wind, which I know we don't have a lot of in Downers now, but it would be nice to see some of that potentially represented as well. Page 50, I am heartened by seeing that we are dropping in terms of our refuse and recyclables, which to me shows that people are using less, right? You know, not when we're dropping in both, that's a good trend. I would love to think about what we could do to even promote the use of reusable items more, you know, reduce that refuse and recyclables, you know, the single-use plastics, whatever that case may be. That could be a really interesting opportunity there. And then with regard to the water quality, pages 52, that area, I would like a little bit more information about why those two streams are impaired, and a little bit more about the water quality and the issues that we have with runoff. I mean, I know when I worked in in rural Ohio, you know, our big issue, of course, was the use of fertilizers, which also is a common problem in suburban areas as well, because folks getting lawn services, you know, it tends to just be let's just dump, you know, whatever nitrogen and phosphorus onto your lawn to make it grow, without really a thought of how much you actually need. So for example, when I worked at the State Nature Preserve that I worked at, we did we worked with farmers to get them grants so that they could figure out, you know, precisely what it was that they needed in order to have a healthy farm. We don't really have that as much for suburban lawns. So it would be, I don't know if that is where our water quality issue is coming from, but it would be nice to know a little bit more about that. Because boy, I one day have a dream of just having a prairie yard and not having grass, because it really is better for the environment. So I would like that flushed out a little bit more about what it is about our runoff that is problematic in terms of our water quality. And then moving into the next section with the greenhouse gases, I also would like to know why it is that residential buildings consume 50% more natural gas than non. It was kind of pointed out as like an interesting point, but I don't know what it means or why. And would just like a little bit more context in terms of, is there something that we can do? Is there a policy that we can set? Are there goals that we can move towards to reduce the natural gas usage? Probably, but nevertheless, right? Yeah, as we start to move away from natural gas and more towards, people are encouraging induction cooktops because that is also promotes better health in families. So having that flushed out would be nice. In terms of, those larger buildings, institutions like Good Sam or, Midwestern, obviously they're going to be operating specialized equipment that we have no control over. So I expect those institutions to probably have a little bit higher electricity consumption, and we just I'm comfortable with that. But when looking at residential, I would be interested, on those maps kind of starting on page 61, where we are a little bit higher than the median, but just below the average, although I think there are a couple outliers that kind of skew average versus median. I would be interested to know what those other municipalities, what those differences are that we think the greenhouse gas emission per capita are so much lower for some of those other ones. Is it because of our house sizes here in Downers Grove tend to be higher? I know that it would be more of a correlation and not so much a causation, but I would be interested to know maybe some of the demographic differences that do cause us to be kind of bumped up above that median in those ways. And then the final big takeaway I had was about the streetlights. I would like to know a little bit more. I know we mentioned the percentages of the streetlights that are ComEd versus us, and that most of the ComEd have been changed over to LEDs, but a lot of ours haven't. I'd like to know more of the specific breakdown of the numbers. We should have mention in here that if we are replacing streetlights or whatever, are we putting in LEDs? Is this kind of like a slow replacement process, just to know that, are we going to be improving the streetlight spot to make that more efficient, knowing that that is kind of our biggest one. It feels like a potential for a good opportunity to start if that's our highest.
And I'm going to put Jason on the spot because that is a great opportunity for
including
us
the garage
to announce that we've actually started that. So if you could just explain what we're on.
Yeah, so we've looking at the village-owned fixtures. We've working with ComEd. They have some REBO programs, so we're looking at kind of the highest standard in terms of LED efficiency in fixtures, but also trying to identify fixtures that also are accredited as dark sky friendly. So we are going to be kind of doing a little test case in the community to see how those work. And if they do, we'll be able to take kind of the cost from that and then apply to the rest of the village-owned fixtures to give you kind of a cost and time frame at some point.
That's great.
In your future.
That's rolling out now. You'll see that more in the budget. So
that's wonderful. And it would be worth it even in there to kind of note that is something that we are currently exploring, so that at least if somebody looks at this report, they realize that, we've noted for the last couple of years that that's one of our highest ones, and we are actively doing something about it, knowing that it will come with a cost. And obviously, I assume that'll be the same with regard to the lighting in the parking garage.
Yeah, we'll also look at that.
It was really interesting to see, but also makes sense that if those lights are on 24/7, that's going to be a high consumption. But I would be interested to know about how drastically can we reduce it if we do, improve the efficiency of the lights that we have on there. And that is all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to take a quick detour since Leslie mentioned the flood rating. Dave, we did recently have an improvement that takes us from one numbered category to another, but it has a real impact for our residents. Could you give us a little bit of information on that?
Thank you for that, Mayor Pro Tem. We will announce this publicly soon and more formally, I guess I should say, with some press release information. But we've just learned from FEMA that our community rating system number, scale 1 to 10, just improved from a 6 to a 5. And actually, it's been improving over many years. It's FEMA's assessment of how well we deal with stormwater management, particularly in floodplains and floodways. The real tangible benefit to our community of this improvement is for those residents who have to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program and pay premiums for that insurance. Their premiums are going to be sort of to a 25% discount now. Currently, they enjoy a 20% discount. So tangible dollars, when we did the Monday call with Commissioner Davenport. So you know what, maybe quantify that and really tie that to our efforts, because that's a real benefit, measurable benefit to our community. So in the coming weeks, we'll have more information on that, a little more detail, a little more formal, but thanks for the opportunity. Great.
Ooh, that actually kicks off one more thing. Sorry, I meant to mention for issues and opportunities. Well, or in general, we do talk a lot about the economic impact, especially right in the risk, because that's what a risk assessment is. But I do also want to point out, which I think the presentation covered, just the value of having biodiversity, whether it be plant or animal. I'm really interested in seeing a little bit more about the impact of, the milder winters on biodiversity. You think about bringing in diseases that never would have been here because normally with the freeze cycles, they die off. It was briefly mentioned, but I think there's value in talking about that a little bit more, because realistically, even the groves that we enjoy now may not be there if we're talking about winters where we're not getting those appropriate freeze cycles. So I don't know, maybe just a little bit more kind of detail on the value of that, because that is something that will be incredibly important for us. When you lose the biodiversity of, for example, a tree canopy, you lose your tree canopy. As we're seeing with bees and pollinators, you lose the diversity of all of those plants that provide pollen, right? We're not going to have food sources anymore if we don't take care of that. So I would like a little bit of focus on that, because it really isn't only about us, but it is also about kind of coexisting with the biodiversity around us as well. Now I'm done, I promise.
Why don't we just head around? Chris?
Sounds good, thank you. So I have a little less than Leslie, mostly because I think part of what I wanted to do was keep it a little more high level in terms of what I saw and what I would like to see. I think generally the existing conditions document gave me some clarity about what we can and can't control in some ways. So it's interesting, and I kind of knew some of this, but it was definitely more clear in this, just in terms of when we look at the residents' feedback, and sort of the top one being water quality and air quality, and those are things that we as a village, we have some piece of, but there are bodies that manage that and control that in ways that we simply couldn't as a community. And so where that sort of led me down was just making sure what we're looking at and what we are looking to with our recommendations is that it is actionable by this body in this town and our residents. Because there are a lot of things that are concerning, and like somebody said, what a day to be talking about this after we saw crazy storms, and what are the things that we can do. I don't know that we can build weather machines, but we can certainly figure out ways that we're more prepared and things like that. So it was just those actionable items that I would like to just make sure we focus on. You mentioned policy, Leslie. That is very important to me as well, and how we can use policy to help meet some of these goals and these action items. But a lot of these things seem very like tactical in some ways, that I think there's just to me, it was just impressive to see, there was the conversation with Greener Grove and PDHA, and just talking about things, like you said, single use, and these very sort of actionable items that I think we as a town can look at and figure out, okay, how do we want to use those ideas to, improve our sustainability in that way. It was also interesting to me that it wasn't mentioned anything about walkability or bike and pedestrian, which happens to be something I'm interested in, but it was in fact high on the rankings in terms of what people want to see as part of their environmental. So I think it got a little glossed over in today's presentation, but I want to make sure I make sure it's recognized that only after air quality and water quality are people interested in a walkable town, bike and pedestrian ways. And so I don't want that to get lost. I know we've got a whole nother plan focused on that, but how we can think about it in this regard as well. One of the purposes that was stated was sort of leaving behind or making this a better place for the generations to come. And when I looked at some of their feedback, those types of things were there too, biking and walking and those kinds of things. So it's really important to me, not just in that regard, but that we look at that feedback from our high schoolers, from our junior high kids, who I think this is particularly important for, as it is the rest of their future and what their generation may face. I'd like to make sure we are absolutely incorporating those concerns and those ideas in a way that if and how we can. Like we talked about excessive heat being the number one concern in terms of, I think, nationally, maybe globally, and storms. And again, just what are the ways that we can think about that all the way down to our building codes. And we talk about impervious surfaces, all those things. I think we've made some efforts. This village has, and Greg and Martin can talk to some of that. We've done a lot of good things. So I just want to make sure, obviously, that continues. And then I think the only thing I would ask is if there's a way we can find out how much solar is used in private in our town, if there's a record of that or something. I'm just sort of curious as to what percentage. I know that sort of feeds back the grid, and what are our private residents and citizens who clearly have a big impact on our environmental sustainability. If that's something we could find out, that would be just interesting to know. And if there's anything else like that, that's just the one that came to my mind. But if there are other ways that we know folks are improving on an individual basis, how do we look at that to help maybe promote or model that type of thing? But other than that, I thought this was extremely interesting. To me, environmental sustainability is a little bit not anywhere near my expertise. And I'm glad we've got you and Jason, you just at the helm. So thank you. As Greg said, thank you. I think that was it.
Great, thank you.
Mike.
Yeah, I guess my big takeaway from the whole thing is just that I remember when I first came on the council, just some debate about, having Jason be part of this. This is kind of identifying a lot of potential things that are going to save us money, and it's a win-win. We're going to make the future brighter and better for Downers Grove, and be really fiscally responsible as well. I mean, the highlight about the street lighting that we're responsible for is a great example of that. So I just have a few questions and comments. When we take natural hazard risk indices and expected change, the last item issued was ground failure. And I was wondering, what is ground failure?
Like sinkholes.
Just like a sinkhole?
Did you
Yeah?
see that in Alton?
Okay, oh, yeah, okay. So, and then temperature change, just a highlight. I mean, and you highlighted this, I think, in the takeaways as well, but wow, the projection going forward, right now we have 0.92 days over 105 degrees, and we're projected to possibly have as many as 14 and a half. I mean, that's, wow. That's something that it's going to help affect our health, and it's definitely a concern. It's that extreme heat. So impact of all this on Downers Grove. I was wondering I wonder what the impact of more people working from home is here in town. I mean, you know, one of the comments that you made, Leslie, trying to figure out why does the energy efficiency seem to be, you know, not as great among, there's more energy being used among residences, and I would guess that you know, you got kind of economies of scale there. So the larger, more efficient equipment taking care of a building of people is a more efficient way of dealing with the heating and cooling than individual units, some of which, you know, are not using very efficient equipment. And certainly with more people working from home, it wouldn't be surprising then to see some less efficiency. So the idea that more people are working from home, and if that continues in the future, is an additional challenge, right? I'm wondering, you know, there was some discussion about, I think, the resiliency of the electrical grid. How resilient is the electrical grid here in Downers Grove? Is there some way to quantify that or assess that? You know, if that's a challenge or a concern. And then thinking about like the storms we've just had, and knowing that we've had some residents up more on the northwest side, right, that were without power here earlier today. Is there a projection of when the power might be restored yet? Have we got any idea on that yet?
We have got. They have told some people between Wednesday and Friday. However, they seem to be getting most people online well in advance of that.
Okay.
But they're always a little, they leave a lot of room in the assessment of restoration time.
So hot and humid, and I imagine if it was 115 degrees out right now or something. Yeah. I'm wondering.
It's not very good either.
I was going to say our grid's better.
Yeah, right. Wondering, is there any assessment about the number of electrical lines that are overhead in town versus buried? And that could be something to think about. So I'd be interested in knowing what the existing condition is with that. Oh, so bioswales mentioned quite a bit here, also in the presentation this evening. For the benefit of those who may not know, what is a bioswale? I'll let you describe.
Bioswale is simply a depression in the landscape that accepts stormwater runoff, usually from an adjacent impermeable surface. So we try to landscape those with native plants because they can, I hate to even say they can handle, there's hardly a plant in the world that can handle our urban runoff. A lot of times it's not necessarily the pollution, it's the heat of the water. If you think it's hot inside your house without air conditioning, imagine asphalt, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, not a cloud in the sky, 100 degrees out. It's about 220 degrees on that asphalt. And when we do finally get some rain, it picks up that temperature and it takes it right into the bioswale. There's not a plant in the world that likes that type, except for maybe Phragmites,
which we don't.
Unfortunately, it's so difficult.
Yes.
So, but a bioswale is a good way to help ameliorate a little bit of that stormwater pollution and get it at least migrating through soils and plants before it goes into a local water body.
And just to add the local touch on this, for the last couple of years, the village has been operating a bioswale program where we take advantage of the drainage ditches in the areas that are not served by rural storm sewer.
$30,000 a year, right?
Yep.
So, so I thought this would be. I'm glad you brought it up because I was going to say we actually have a program. So, how do people go about accessing that?
First thing to do is just go to our website, downers.us, type in bioswale, it'll take you to an informational page, and then it'll lead you to our stormwater administrator, Julie Lomax. She can give her a call, give her an email, and she will get you hooked up with that.
Just won an award.
She just did win an award for her work on this very topic and others. She's a stormwater administrator.
We're lucky to have her.
We'll celebrate that soon publicly as well.
Yeah.
Spoilers.
Yeah.
All
By the way, Darth Vader is Luke's father.
No. Yeah. Surface waterways. This came up. So you mentioned So there's actually three, so we say the two largest waterways in the village are St. Joseph's Creek and Lacey Creek. But we really have three waterways. So I would appreciate if we could include
Is that
Prentice.
Prentice?
You just put Prentice Creek in here and just say the three
We were-
waterways we have?
So, we were going to add Prentice as, but it's on their 303D list, but it's not actually identified as impaired, it's identified as a watch. So that's why we didn't add it. So by EPA standards, it's not recognized as impaired, it's recognized as we're watching it.
Got it.
We'll add that though, because
this-
our whole
yeah.
stormwater utility talks about our 3 major waterways in town. So we can
Yes.
add that. Yeah.
And so, and this is an existing condition assessment, so I just
We'll add it.
wanted it,
Yep.
you know, as a South Sider.
No creek for you.
No creek. So floodplains and floodways, one of the challenges I know we have, and this is pertinent to your neighborhood there, Leslie, and Deer Creek, is that, that the, floodplains in Downers Grove that are being affected because they're downstream of flood areas in adjacent communities.
Yes.
And so this is a challenge we have, right? And how do we, how do we take care of our own, when we're not able to really affect the source, right? And so this is going to involve some more cooperation with adjoining communities and addressing some of this, because
And
it's,
don't keep jumping in, I sorry to keep interrupting.
Yeah,
but
no, good.
It's timely because we do recognize that particularly in that neighborhood. We made some local improvements, which were very helpful, but they're not as complete as they could be. And so we've been working with the Village of Westmont and County of DuPage to come up with regional improvements as well. That's been a little bit delayed, but in fact, we just re-engaged with Westmont last week on this very topic.
excellent. Well, these are, this is going to have to be something continuing, though, right?
For sure.
Going into the future, and especially as the climate changes. So on impermeable surfaces, also echoing, I'd love to know what percentage of Downers Grove watershed is impermeable, right? So we had the 4,000 acres, and it was mentioned that in excess of 10% of a watershed's area can have a negative impact on an ecosystem, health and quality. So just beg the question then, what's our percentage, right? To bring that home. And then kind of piggybacking on my last point, to what extent are we impacted by impervious areas in adjacent communities or in our unincorporated areas, right? That's because we're not living on an island. Also, this, on the solid waste and recycling, I mean, I noticed the trend was down in all categories. This was for residential waste.
So yeah, these are numbers provided by Republic.
So why aren't we kind of documenting commercial here as well?
So commercial is something that's up to individual businesses to contract out. So we don't have the data availability on that front.
So we don't have the data. So, well, they're residents as well. So it's kind of where I was going with that. And but it's great that the trend is down, and it probably bears mentioning in the key takeaways at the end too.
Especially as population goes up.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, but we'd like to keep that trend going down.
Especially as population
Goes up. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, so on our assessments about the GHG emissions and those comparisons, and Leslie, you were getting into this a little bit too. I wonder what one of the reasons why our numbers, I'm just speculating, one of the reasons why our numbers might be a little higher than some of the others is because so many people are employed here.
That's exactly right. So when you're looking at the per capita, I actually had to take out Oak Brook because it's such an outlier because the ratio of people that work versus live in that community. So comparably, we have almost a 1-to-1 ratio in terms of the number of people that live in Downers Grove and work in Downers Grove. And the majority of DuPage communities are bedroom communities.
Yes.
You know, so
So-
it
and
is
then-
non-residential buildings that are contributing to the whole total greenhouse gas emissions. So that's why I included a comparison of only looking at household energy emissions.
Got it. So we'll just,
So this figure 7 is only household energy emissions? or-
Figure 8 is.
So this one is all emissions, and then this one on the back is just
household,
Got it.
that's why you
So
broke
above
that,
the
that's why you
median.
broke it out, so I was kind of, at first I noted it, and then I turned the page and I read, I was like, oh, look at that, Jason was thinking like I was thinking, but I wanted to kind of highlight there. And then, boy, that, emissions from natural gas, the second largest user of natural gas of the village properties is the Public Works Building. So I wonder, there was some comment here about it being, a lot of garage doors, big open spaces and such, but there may also be an issue with insulation and air sealing. So that's an issue. And then just one of the positives maybe to the warmer winters is that we end up maybe not needing to heat as much, right? So that's looking for a little silver lining there going forward. And did we ever, have we ever solar was mentioned a couple times, with our parking deck using so much electricity, that was kind of a surprising point. Had we ever considered in the past some sort of like a solar panel top
We
or something?
did look at it preliminarily several years ago. I'd like the opportunity with the current team to relook at it.
Yeah.
Actually.
Cost maybe less now, yeah.
This,
Yeah, I mean,
the grant application that we put in through the Greenest Regions Compact actually considered that as one of the potential projects that would be funded by that.
that's awesome to hear.
Yeah.
All right, and I think that does it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
I am not going to go through this page by page, but just simply share some observations and takeaways of my own. So first of all, glad to see that this reports the really exciting high marks that we got from the 2023 Green Regions Compact report that the village staff did. Obviously, that plays a big role in this. I thought that the report, the key takeaways, and the opportunities all were fair summaries of the observations, both opportunities and some obstacles, and I think that's important so that you're getting a realistic assessment of not only where you're at, but what you can really work on and what people think. So I thought that was very well summarized. Very glad to see that overall, as mentioned a moment ago, we received fairly high marks from things that we've been doing well all along. Perhaps, as was noted, one of our perceived weaknesses is not promoting that sufficiently or doing it in a very organized and recognized fashion. So we've not been very good about pointing out and celebrating the things that we have been doing for a long time. Not that we can't be doing more, but I think that would change that perception a lot. So one of my comments was, I know it's a perceived weakness, but it might be a perceived weakness of insufficient awareness. Because I don't want it to suggest that we're not doing things, it's that there's a perception that we're not because we haven't been very good, as was noted, about celebrating ourselves. And I think that's important because as you go to try to build a culture of bringing people along with you, you have to talk about the things that have worked well and celebrate them so you get people excited about them and they want to participate in it. And so that's certainly something that we can do. And it's usually a light lift to do that, too. I was very pleased to see generally positive responses from the participants in a lot of areas. That was good, particularly because the people that often will fill out things are the ones that are most excited or passionate about something, and it was all generally pretty positive. I appreciated the noting that there are some conflicting viewpoints in terms of priorities, but that's going to happen whether it's age groups or it's just what's individually important to people. Some of that was not surprising, some of that was surprising. But it's good to get that kind of input, and again, I appreciate you reflecting that because it helps us talk about policy. And the one thing that I will say is I kind of like the report the way it is. because this is an existing conditions report that to me is, I think as was mentioned in the introduction, is the basis for future policy. So
Yes.
I'm a little bit, I don't want to start baking policy into this document per se, but this is what we're supposed to look at, and the Environmental Concerns Commission and staff are supposed to look at, and then start to tease out policy opportunities. This is consistent with even some other things. I don't want to start, this is the wrong word, presupposing, but rather, here's what you got. Reminds me of that scene in Apollo 11, or Apollo 13, excuse me, where they're trying to figure out how to get the spacecraft back, and all the engineers in the room, they dump all that stuff on the table and say, well, here's what you have, you have to figure it out. This is kind of like the table full of stuff.
Yeah.
Now we have to figure out what to do with it and what's going to work best for our community.
I like that.
So I kind of like the way this is structured and the way this is portrayed. Because it leads in my next point is, and this was very well highlighted, is the importance of building community support for major initiatives, particularly ones that require trade-offs. I thought it was very well stated, because for it to be actionable and successful, you have to bring the community along with you. Sometimes you have to educate, or maybe even celebrate and so promote to get the community to come along with you. But there are huge opportunities, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, for example, the stormwater utility, which clearly was one of those things that we talk about nets. We don't talk about the other idiom anymore, about capturing 3 birds with 1 net. And talk about a combination play and a collaborative effort. So stormwater utility addresses and has addressed very effectively flooding issues. It's also addressed water quality issues. I remember used to be able to memorize the NPDES phase 2 factors back when we were talking about stormwater utility, because it's a huge water quality issue. And then also it's been a huge financial issue for the stability of this community. So you want to talk about things that people could get behind. Here's a major water quality improvement. You're addressing a concern to people who live in this community day in and day out, and you're helping the financial stability of your community. Find me more of those things to get behind. But I think that's where this kind of report can help us look for those combination wins, because that's a big one. Contracted services. I noticed that because immediately my mind springs to, okay, what are we outsourcing? What are the terms and conditions of our agreement saying? What can we realistically negotiate? And without driving our prices up, get more of our vendors to do things, because that's where you can have an immediate effect through your contractual relationships. I mean, yes, there's a negotiated dance there, but that immediately struck me as something that the ECC and staff could particularly focus on. I know in the past we've done that with Republican recycling contracts, but maybe there's more. Maybe there's more. That'd be something to be very interested. I know Brandon's now looking at me. Darn it, that's more work for me. I got to review all our contracts. Darn it. I did have a question that I thought Commissioner Davenport was going to ask. I said I won't go through this page by page, but I do have one question with respect to the graphic on page 60. You mentioned commuting patterns. I noticed that these are 2019 commuting patterns. I'd just be super curious to see what they are today. That the world all changed.
Well,
Yeah,
I underlined and,
Yeah, well, you can't do it all.
Well, they said that once data is available, it needs to be updated.
I will note
so.
to the comprehensive plan, one of the data points in there talks about a census survey asking people commuting patterns, and it was identified that I think it was 21% of people that are living in Downers Grove stated that they were teleworking to some degree. Challenges with that question: is it 5 days a week, 1 day a week? Working. That's a really important factor in terms of the emissions that come from transportation and commuting patterns. So I will have to give some thought about how we can figure out how to get some proxies for the appropriate data there.
That would be awesome. Thank you. A couple more things. One, and maybe this is just despite what I said beyond this the existing conditions, but one of the things that we do, which is a program that has been successful that one might not ordinarily think of as sustainability, is historic preservation, because it sustains existing properties, and so you're getting benefits from repurposing an existing building, you're keeping things out of landfills, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then I also understand that things that maybe were built in 1852 might not be as energy efficient, and so on and so forth today. So I'm a little curious about that, but it would be another example of a combo, where if you can say, look, we're both preserving the character of our community, we're preserving our history, and we're promoting sustainability. That's another great thing that you can get a lot of people behind. And talk about collaboration. There might be some organizations in this room that maybe like historic preservation and also like sustainability. The more people you can get to line up and align behind things, whether they're public or private groups, you know me, I'm all about cooperation, collaboration, and particularly when it comes to waste consolidation. Last but not least, and this is something I should have brought up with all these existing condition reports, is for every one of them, we've had all kinds of comments, and in some cases, there have been changes. And this is only because this came up in a professional setting for me. Are we identifying these as drafts or initial, or will the ones that are done called final?
Did I
Only
miss that on this
because it's important that if down the road somebody is looking at a document, they're looking at the
Yeah. We
final
forgot to put
document.
draft.
Understanding nothing is truly final, but
Yeah.
These are all draft, and we should have made that more clear. The three, the council considered the last two meetings and this one. What happens next then is we get all these questions, comments, et cetera, and they get updated by all the sub-consultants and House Levine. We will get them back out to the council and then to the community. They're supposed to address everything we've heard over the last several meetings. They will be marked final and available publicly.
okay. So the records information management person in me is just screaming out that we need to know what our final source of truth is with respect to what the document is, and that goes for all these, not just this one. I just didn't think of it until today.
I said that with a high degree of confidence, and it reminds me I should probably check in with Stan. Did I get that right?
We will figure out a way to make sure that it's marked final on the documents, so we, or where that's the final document.
Right, so if there's ever any question about what is the document for purposes
Yes.
of the foundation for all these great policy decisions, that we're all looking at the right one, and when I say we, I mean everybody.
Yes.
I seem to think the others had draft on it.
They did.
I think it might
That's
just be
right.
this
Did
one.
they? Just this one?
It's
Just
correct.
this
This one we
We'll-
missed it.
We'll make sure, we'll go
The
back.
new
to
guys.
those drafts and
The new guys.
We'll get it. Thank you.
So, well, that explains why I didn't mention it before.
Yeah.
Testing you.
That's all I have for now, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. There's at the bottom of each page.
Yeah, just a few things. And it's briefly mentioned under the energy efficiency and energy sources, under the issues and opportunities, but the external funding, I feel like that and the education on that could be an opportunity on its own. Just thinking back, like, I have a commercial property of my own, and I didn't realize that I could upgrade all of my lighting and HVAC systems to this much more renewable, a much better source, an energy efficient source without spending, a ton of money. And once I found out about that there was programs through ComEd and other organizations, it was a no-brainer because the education behind it, they tell you how much it's going to save you over time. And I think a lot of people, like myself, when you put dollars to it, it starts to make a little bit more sense to them. So if there was some kind of education out there that could kind of point you in the right direction for these sources, I know it was briefly mentioned at an EDC meeting that I was at. There was a speaker that came in and gave a little spiel on that, but I think that could be a huge opportunity, especially seeing as the commercial buildings are seem to be the major producer of the greenhouse gases. Which leads me to my next thing. So is it safe to assume that we are also the third largest commercial and industrial concentration in these?
I'll have to double
Are
check,
these
but yeah,
towns?
that's likely true.
Okay.
What was it, Danny? Sorry, are we the third largest?
So in here, it states that Downers Grove is also the third most populated community in the county, though total emissions are greatly influenced by concentration of commercial and industrial buildings as well as by total population. So I was just confirming, since we're the third highest emissions producer, that we also have the third highest concentration of commercial buildings.
We can find out.
And I think I was just looking at the map that shows the green infrastructure. I think there are a couple more permeable paver roads, although much older, but near Prince Pond. There's only that one circle there on Grove Street. I think there's a few more.
We don't really
Brick, I don't
classify
think they're
those as permeable.
Oh, okay.
There's a brick.
All right.
Are they brick?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most of the things on that map I just happened to find as I was driving around, so I've tried to be as thorough as possible, but if you have things, the other question would be, and I think it goes back to the solar panels, a lot of them were in private residences. We can talk about that, but I tried to not, I didn't want to shame anybody, and I didn't want to put anyone on the spot if they opened this up and said, oh my God, that's my house. So tried to
Well,
be
maybe not,
careful.
don't include a picture, maybe.
Just talk about it, don't.
With
Yeah.
some permit data that Stan pulled for us a couple of years ago, I think we could update.
Yeah, we
as
can
well.
pull
that'd be
permit
great.
data on the number of solar panel permits we've gotten in the past few years, and maybe update it.
That'd be great.
So,
And then the only other thing I was thinking is, as Martin said, like we haven't done a good job of highlighting what we are doing. Could there be an opportunity there to, you know, highlight, of course, highlight what we're doing and kind of set an example as what best practices are for the community and for businesses to model? So,
Thank you. I'm going to pick right up on that. That was one of the first things that jumped out at me. And I think that was really just, we kind of baked a lot of these things in, right? It was the way we roll. We're looking for ways to be better stewards. And we did it without really putting it on blast, right? And we had an Apollo 13 reference. I'm going to go college basketball. Tom Izzo would tell you that leadership by example isn't leadership at all. And so I think we, could have gotten better at that, and I think it's about time we've started, and it's good that we've started.
If you don't mind, I want to interrupt there for
Please.
a minute, Pro Tem, because I think oftentimes this gets a little misconstrued, and sometimes our communications
Mm.
department takes a little bit of the brunt of this comment. Here's what we learned when we brought Jason onto the team and when we did the GRC exercise. We learned that while a lot of our sustainability efforts were sort of baked into just how we roll, we were so decentralized. Like, I remember we were doing these GRC meetings, we called staff members in, and I was doing my whiteboard thing with staff, right? And I was like, what else do we do? And all these staff members were like, oh, well, we do this, and we do this. The other half of the room didn't even know about it, right? One of the things we do really well is communicate to the public. Doug and his team, fantastic. We weren't telling Doug and his team all the things that we were doing because we didn't know. We didn't know. It was a huge success in building a culture of sustainability in our staff team. Where we lacked was a central depository for information and management. And now we have Jason here, and it's very helpful. So I didn't want that to be misconstrued as like our communications department somehow let us down. What was really fascinating is we didn't know internally, we weren't connecting all those dots. Once we did that, once you turn Douglas on it, you get things like the bird's eye view videos of sustainability. So just wanted to connect those dots that we have a better understanding as a staff team, which leads to a better opportunity for community awareness. So
Absolutely. And I didn't mean to be casting aspersions on any particular
no.
department or anything, but, and as somebody who's been sitting up here for almost 12 years, I have to own some of that too.
Yeah.
I wasn't out there
That's what I was
talking
gonna
about
say.
it as much as we could have. Because, when you see the good work that's going on, okay, that's everybody else is seeing it too, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
yeah.
I was pleasantly surprised at protecting water quality and reducing waste being at the top at question 1. I fully expected to see climate and climate change and clean energy. Now, it's the observation, I think, about young folks sort of driving those pieces of environmental sustainability is apt, but I wonder if there's anything, and this data may not even exist yet, because we're, 20, 25 years into climate change really being something that people have focused on, at least that in a, I think, a broad and sustained manner. Is this something that is talked about principally among the younger generation? Because yes, we are going to be handing the planet off to them, right? I mean, they're going to inherit whatever mess there is. Is this something that younger folks are carrying forward with them as they age, or is this simply a time of life? Yes, the younger folks are interested in this, and we expect that the next generation will be, and by the time these high schoolers are sitting in these chairs, they may not be talking about climate change. They may be talking about something else.
Keeping water out of their basement.
Yeah, exactly. And that takes me right into my next issue. Apparently, stormwater and flooding remains the universal issue. I guess some things never change. Because between protecting water quality and mitigating flooding spurred by climate change, we've spent an awful lot of time up here over the last 15, 20 years talking about and dealing with stormwater runoff, and it's something I remember being talked about by our oldest residents and our youngest residents when I was reading in my daughter's kindergarten class many, many years ago. Hey kids, how many of you had your basement flood? Half the hands went up at least. It apparently never goes anywhere. And I'm glad we're talking too about the dollars that can be saved through different efforts, because one of the easy critiques is, well, that's just going to cost us money. Well, there's A, yes, you're going to spend some money, but B, you're going to recoup some of that money over time, or you're going to see discounts right up front. And thinking about it only in dollars and cents is missing part of the picture too, because there are other pieces to value, and I think finding the right way to talk about that value are going to be key. Talking about some of the trade-offs and that we're going to face. I mean, on page 13, DGS1 workshop, lack of green space downtown, street parking and congestion, bike connectivity and trails. All of those three things run flat into each other. And I think how we deal with that, as well as any number of other potential conflicts, is going to be key. I've got some other notes in here, but my colleagues have pretty well covered it. Overall, I'm very pleased with the report. I think it tells us where we're at and gives us a good roadmap for making the decisions that we've got to make moving forward. Any other comment? Chris?
I wanted to mention, we talked about the work from home data. SHRM, SHRM, which is a human resources organization, I assume we're a member or have some access to that. They collect a lot of data on that, especially work from home stuff. That may be a good, it's SHRM.
Yeah, no E.
Added an E in there.
Yeah, that's fine.
All-cited.
Yeah.
Term, got it.
Just if you're looking for a source, that might be a good place to get info on that, to maybe even know just where the trends are headed to.
All right, I'll open it up for public comment. Any thoughts on the environmental sustainability existing conditions report? Please.
My name is Marna Greco. I've been in town for 38 years as a business owner. I think you should try and find a way that you can look at that commercial. There's, maybe 6 garbage companies that service that, because I think though the residential might be going down, I think the commercial is going up. I think one of the reasons why the gas is so high in the bigger commercial buildings, apartment buildings, is because landlords have to turn the gas on at a certain point and leave it running for a certain point. Most people in their homes, if the heat is on, they're not opening up the windows. People that rent and whatnot don't really care because they're not paying the gas bill. They really only have to pay the electric bill. We have a lot of problems with the rainwater, even in my building, which is a brand new building. We have water coming into the front entranceway of our vestibule, just with this last couple of. My neighbors where I live had cut down some trees a few years ago that were 60, 70 years old. I was fortunate I didn't get water because they have 2 sump pumps and a backup sump pump. But one pump, when they cut down these 10 trees, my other sump pump kicked in. Yeah. Another person that I work with, she couldn't understand. She goes, I lived there for 20 years, I never had water. And I said, weren't you complaining about all the sunlight coming into your house now because the neighbors cut down the trees? So like over at Longfellow, where my sister used to live, she lives here in Downers Grove now, when they built these McMansions like she had built, they had to, in that area, a certain percentage of what your build would be you had to take a percentage, I don't know if it was 5% or whatever, and you had to put it into mature landscaping. Trees and bushes had to be a certain caliber, you know? And so now we have those Stepford homes over there with no landscaping. It looks ridiculous, and you're gonna have a water issue. If you have those roots in the ground, they soak up so much, right? You know, there's a house on Roslyn Road that has a lot of water issues, and finally they put a weeping willow in there. I must have said that a million times. It's gonna soak up a lot of water. So you can do something like that. You can also, when somebody cuts down trees in order to build a McMansion, for every tree, one of our neighboring towns does this, they have a fine. And then they give out money every year for up to $599, again, towards a certain caliber tree, and has to be one of the trees that they're recommending that you plant on your land. So there are some other ways that we can help with all this runoff water and, you know, trying to not have everyone's basements flooding all the time and going into these creeks that keep getting deeper and deeper that he's talking about. So just about a few thoughts.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'm going to ask a question Corinne asked me, and that's the solar panels on the garage. Is that going to take away parking spaces?
Only the one you were going to park in, Janet.
Say what?
Only the one you were going to park in.
I'm sure it's going to have my name on it. Is it? I mean, I don't know.
I would not want it to.
Well, it would have to.
It depends on how it's installed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The structure can be built.
Well, I
Could be a
found-
canopy.
That's what I was thinking, parking
right.
underneath,
Exactly.
parking
I
underneath.
mean, as long as the
Provide-
structure allows you to canopy it above the top.
Yeah, you want it to stick up as high as you can.
Yeah,
It is
cars would
built
park
to be
underneath.
extended.
Oh, it's built to
But
be
it seems,
extended.
it seems
Yeah,
the more,
of course.
Yeah. Oh, so yeah,
more
we'll be
we,
able to canopy.
which of course, there's gonna be more growth, if there's no way you can control that, but it seems like Mother Nature always loses. It just seems that every time we have another project goes in, we're always getting variances for this or that. Somebody petitioner comes in, more trees come down. And then, of course, you get your little obligatory little tree about that big as a replacement. The homes that they're building, the big homes that are going up, they're covering more of the properties. I mean, this all affects runoff, water retention and whatever. And I constantly see it's like poor Mother Nature's always giving up something. But how do you control that? Because if you get, well, it's my property, I have a right to do this, I have a right to build on this,
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know how you control that, or get a balance, I should say. But, no, it's no wonder we have water problems, because properties take up more space, there's less ground cover to absorb anything. We lose trees. I mean, luckily we have a program here in town, which we took advantage of where I live, Parkway trees, and which was great. I mean, it's, they plant them, they take care of them, they water them. And my brother, where they live, I said, you gotta sign up for what they did. So we do take advantage of those programs, I'm thankful for that. But, I don't know, it's really a balancing act. I don't know what the answer is.
Any other comment? Ken?
No.
No?
Yeah, I've got a couple of comments. So, not to say that I was bored with the conversation, but I did go online and have a look while you were talking, and it looks like we have 14.65 square miles, which would be 9,376 acres. Maybe that's the right answer, I hope so. But what I wanted to really say is, I think whatever direction the village decides to head in, you need to pick a direction that you can not walk the talk, but run the talk. So if I think about the brand new building next door, just when you leave tonight, circle the car park and think about permeable pavers. When you think about that building, it doesn't have any alternative source of heating. It's natural gas. and the solar is minimal. So I don't want to rehash all those topics. I've already said enough of them before, but I think you need to pick topics that you can really run with, not just sort of half dabbling, right? And there were probably all good reasons why those things didn't happen there. But if that's a thing that you're promoting, and someone comes to file their permit, you know, and they're saying, oh, wow, this building's like 1 year old, and they didn't put permit papers down, why do I have to? You know, it kind of doesn't sit right. People think it's just a farce. The other thing would be to make incentives meaningful. So I looked at, you know, some time ago, like bioswale, trying to offset my runoff, because I actually think that I could offset probably the first 2 inches of rainfall from a whole property. I think it's possible to do. Not every property can probably do that, but I think that the stormwater program, you know, maybe they won awards for it, that's great. Everyone needs an award, but you know, it's got to be meaningful to me. I didn't really remember it being something that like I was gasping to fill the forms out for, you know, it was kind of incidental. So make it more meaningful if you want to encourage it. And you know, with stormwater, we probably know what the cost per cubic yard of mitigation is. You know, maybe we should think about that. Are we offering at least that amount? Because that cost will increase, right, over time. And then probably the one that's closest to my heart is, you know, I just heard the kind of, we're handing the planet off to the next generation and we've got to, you know, involve them. But that's not the case. We're using the planet together with the younger generation right now. So actually, it should be astounding to us that there's like nobody in here from that generation. So it's on us all. Okay, I've got an excuse, my kids are out of town. But it's on us all to bring our children in and our friends' children and get them engaged, because, you know, it will affect them the most. But it doesn't mean that we can decide for them. You know, they have to be part of the conversation. They have to drive that, being part of it. And maybe, you know, there needs to be some thought of what sort of pathways are there to get input from, like, the high school clubs into the council. You know, maybe that's a thought that has to go in here as well. So, anyway.
Thank you. Any other comment?
Yeah, I'll beat my head against the brick wall one more time.
I knew you'd tell us what we're doing wrong.
Couldn't resist, as you know. Let me try not to bury the lead points. Probably, if you have been on the council, you've heard me comment about some of this stuff previously, but since it's now front of mind, maybe it might penetrate a little bit better. As I alluded to in my comment in the meeting earlier, the definition of sustainability, which is used in the report, is, by my understanding, inadequate. No one in Downers Grove knows or cares otherwise, apparently. Not the council, not the people who think they care about the environment, and not the remainder of the residents. From what I've observed in paying attention to meetings as much as I've tried, compared to when I was addressing council years ago, I don't see that council reflects any better sense of education or information about the subject than they did then, when I first started questioning the way you use the phrase, which you still continue to use, which, as I said previously, is to use the word sustainability as if it's a synonym for protection and beautification, and not the word as usually understood, which is sustainable in the sense that it's used in other contexts. The draft report indicates apparently that the consultants are perfectly willing to go along with this self-deception and gaslighting. And I don't know enough about Mitch Nick's role to gauge whether he's making much difference in that regard. Although, as I said, as long as the definition is the one that is inadequate, I don't see his role helping much either. Which begs the obvious question, how do Downers Grove residents then move away from an unsustainable way of living? The unavoidable conclusion is residents of Downers Grove are no more prepared to move toward an environmentally sustainable way of living than they are to promote affordable housing or equitable funding of K-12 schools in Illinois. The inadequate definition serves the key purpose of disguising that the nature of the challenge of environmental sustainability is ultimately political economic, not biological or solely ecological or technological. The disguise means we scrupulously avoid asking the key questions: is capitalism compatible with environmental sustainability? Is democracy, is relentless pursuit of economic growth? If not, then what? The latter is particularly problematic since growth is the go-to balm that salves all social and societal wounds, including here in Downers Grove. The definition that you use, reduce the negative impact, aka beautifying and protecting the environment, the physical environment of Downers Grove, is not the same as the one I mentioned, keep reciting, of attaining and maintaining a sustainable rate of resource usage, which is a proper but stricter definition that everyone avoids like the plague, including the conversation here tonight. So what I hear is being attempted is that you're just trying to figure out ways for the village council and residents to do something that they can then define as reducing the impact, which means you can then do just about anything and count it as a success. And a specific example that I'll mention again, which came up in a prior meeting, not from me initially, was that a resident pointed out in one of the conversations that while you're congratulating yourself on the greenness of the new facility that's being built, you ignore the fact that the impact of that is offset to some degree, unknown at this point, by selling some of your property in order to build a multi-story residential building that has an impact on sustainability in terms of rate of resource usage in the village. And I asked this question from the very beginning, and it's never been answered, and it's still not being answered, in terms of what responsibility does the village council understand it has for assessing the sustainability, not just of its own operations, but of the way of living in the village as a whole. Let me see, where am I here? The inadequacy of the council's approach is further exposed by the contradiction between the village's self-assessment using the GRC protocol, which I consider the equivalent of asking a D student to grade their own paper, given your own admission that you lack expertise, and the result of the community survey in which environmental sustainability is deemed the weakest trait of village life. So those are general comments. Let me go to specific comments. Stakeholders, who were the 11 people who were deemed worthy of being given a private session, and what was the criteria by which they were selected? On page 9, the term was introduced of sustainable community. I don't know what the understanding is of how that connects to environmental sustainability. Many of the items listed there hint at the emphasis being on your understanding that the objective here is beautify and protect, not sustainable rate of resource usage. I'm not opposed to the idea of beautifying and protect, but the question is, what's the connection between that and sustainable rate of resource usage? And we'll come to a key point on that in that regard later on. Drinking water. Downers Grove switched over because it wasn't able to continue using its groundwater for drinking water. That creates a problem by tapping into Lake Michigan water, which the city is more than willing to sell to Downers Grove in the suburbs. The problem there is that violates what supposedly is the basis on which water is taken from the lake, and that it's supposed to be returned to the lake. Does Downers Grove do that? Do the suburbs do that? To my understanding, the answer is no, because Downers Grove is outside the watershed of Lake Michigan. Let's see. Regarding the climate risk chapter, I guess my reaction was that it greatly understates the impact that Downers Grove residents are going to have to deal with, and it presumes that, yes, there may be a higher cost, but we'll be fine absorbing that higher cost somehow. The notion that the GRC is a qualitative tool, to me, suggests that, as this statement says here, the quantitative data in the report is based on binary analysis, not intended to claim that an objective or goal has been fully achieved. The fact that there's nothing quantitative about it suggests to me that in terms of establishing rate of usage, we know very little, and thus it's not of much value at all. On page 35, there's a table. I'm not sure what it's trying to show. Maybe someone could clarify that. There's been comments already about tracking and reporting and policy and planning being two notable deficiencies. That's quite interesting that that's the case. Contrary to what was said here, the existing conditions analysis I found provided that little actual data and little actual analysis, which to me reflects the fact that we have very little actual understanding of sustainability if we're talking about it in the more proper way, as opposed to the looser way that you are preferring to use it, which is this protect and beautify. Specifically, let's see here, some people have already mentioned about percentages being missing in the breakdowns on things like impermeable surface, pre-canopy, green infrastructure. To me, I find it disappointing to look at the maps, for example, and see what to me suggests we prefer to build out in order to generate property taxes rather than think about resource usage of any kind, even within the village in the past.
Hey, David, I tend to have a little quicker hook than the mayor, but we're at about 8 minutes. Do we?
Well, is there a limit in this context too?
Actually, yes.
Whoa. All right. Well, so in terms of the resources, very little quantitative data is my difficulty with what was said there. So I don't think there's much actual existing conditions to speak of. The final key punchline for me is that in the greenhouse gas inventory discussion, the problem is hinted at in the paragraph that says, Scope 3 emissions, especially the inclusion of those produced in the supply chains of goods and services, are complex. The choice of how to distribute supply chain emissions must also be made, and there is debate regarding this distribution between producers and consumers. As such, Scope 3 were not included in the inventory. To me, this hints at the biggest problem of all, which is that you're ignoring all these resources that you don't pay attention to. You're ignoring the greenhouse gas emissions that are embodied in all of the resources on which life in Downers Grove depends. There was, at the least, there should have been, to me, a discussion of what the debate is, what the discussion is about how to distribute, and then, for example, suggest why or why not you don't use those. In the comment that was in my e-remark that was censored, I mentioned, for example, that whereas most people tend to think of property value as a good thing, if you think of it as a proxy for the unsustainable way of living, you come to recognize maybe it's not, on the face of it, a good thing. The issue is, though, if you ignore the resources that are being used to maintain the way of living in the village, the likelihood is that you're absorbing the bulk of the emissions and the bulk of the resources that are being used, period. I've attempted to talk about this in terms of things like peak oil. I don't know if anybody in this room is aware of what peak oil refers to and why that's an issue. but it's a huge issue once you come to understand it. When we're talking about parking spaces and this sort of thing, in the not too distant future, if the people who refer to, who analyze the availability of energy are correct, the parking spaces are going to be the least of our problems. Part of the gaslighting that has gone on has emphasized in that regard renewable energy as a solution, making it appear like all we need to do to take care of the problem of CO2 emissions is move over to renewable energy and everything will be fine. Well, if you actually look at the data, that's a misconception for two reasons. One, renewable energy is only a small fraction of all the energy used. And two, in terms of the way we behave as humans up till now, whenever we come up with new energy resources, we just add that to the energy that we're using. So that becomes a problem as well. But it, as I'm suggesting a moment ago in terms of talking about peak oil, the issue that humanity faces that is crucial is the likelihood, according to the data, that the worldwide availability of fossil energy is peaking right now. And given that our way of life assumes that it's going to go on forever, if it's not going to go on forever, we're in big trouble. And that's not an issue that has ever been discussed or talked about in any of these meetings. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. I'll bring it back to the council one last time. Any other comments, Mike?
Yeah, a couple of the tree canopy comments reminded me of a couple things I forgot to ask. Our canopy cover page shows all the tree canopy in Downers Grove, but I'm wondering, are the forest preserve areas included in that calculation? Is Maple Grove Forest Preserve even technically in Downers Grove, or is that actually a carve-out area?
So for annexation law, it counts as part of the village, and for other applications, it is not considered. So it's one of those, forest preserves in Illinois have different rules for different applications.
Okay.
That count. I don't know how it was counted.
Yeah, I'll have to actually, so the data is taken from the Chicago Regional
Well,
Tree Initiative. I'll have to look at.
I just want to make sure we have the data right, but the real thing I was interested in is if we were to pull out, because if we were to pull out Hidden Lake Forest Preserve and Lyman Woods and Maple Grove Forest Preserve, I wonder what our numbers look like then.
Yep.
Because, a lot of communities aren't as fortunate to have that. It's almost like an offset, right? So if we were if we're really kind of comparing how we stand relative to other communities, I think we kind of have to pull some of that out to get a more accurate picture of what we actually look like, right? So that's all I have. Thank you.
All right. Is 2 whiteboards full enough?
We truly appreciate your feedback and careful consideration of the document. I know it was a lot to digest in a very short amount of time. And I genuinely mean it. All your comments were very thoughtful and are going to be very helpful as we edit this. And then as the next step, take this to the Environmental Concerns Commission. I also just like to remind everybody in the public that we have some visioning workshops coming up for all of the guiding DG plans. Starting next week, so Monday at 6:30 we'll be at Downers Grove South High School, and then on Thursday we have 2 workshops, one here at Village Hall in the afternoon, and then another at the Park District Rec Center in the evening. So we encourage all of you to come out. This is an opportunity for you to provide additional feedback that you can see that council is considering as they make their decisions and have conversations, and then we'll take this again to the ECC, and then the next step in the process of the sustainability plan is going to be drafting an outline for what that plan structure will actually look like. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Great work, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you. But wait, there's more.
I'm going to go right into long-range planning, but my friend Doug here is going to help me move some high-tech stuff here. And this is tricky because I remember when Commissioner Gilmartin was sitting up here, and tonight we'll include a board flip. And so
I think we got clearance.
are we in here?
We've got that technology in this building?
Clearance.
Wait to see the next building.
Well done.
Okay. So we're on to the second portion of the manager's report tonight, which is a further discussion of our long-range plan. We're actually updating the current long-range plan. For a reminder, our long-range plan is actually a combination of strategic planning and financial planning. It's a consideration of both of those things at the same time, which leads to our long-range plan. That long-range plan drives the preparation of annual budgets. It certainly influences policy decisions made on a regular basis by this council, and staff actually refers to this document on a daily basis as we consider operational aspects. Long-range plan includes several items. It includes our strategic goals. It identifies key trends and issues affecting our long-term future, and it develops strategies and potential solutions to help address those key trends and issues. And it does include the council's 2-year work plan called Priority Action Items. We're going to talk about those at our next meeting. This long-range plan was prepared by this council when this council was sworn in, this iteration of the council. It was done last summer. In the second summer, if you will, where there's no changes in the council, we just do an annual update, so not a full-blown exercise. We're doing 3 meetings this round for the update. Meeting number 1 took place several weeks ago. It was the discussion on the general fund sustainability. Tonight we're in meeting number 2. We have 2 topics: a discussion of the property tax levy as it relates to public safety pensions, and a water fund sustainability. So that's what we're doing tonight. And then in August, we'll review our priority action items and verify that work plan going forward. There's a lot of information here. It's getting pretty late. This is important stuff. I want to tell the public a couple things. One is, if you want to get a real good understanding of this stuff, there's a full report in the agenda packet. The other thing is every council member was briefed individually in detail. So if it feels like we're moving pretty quickly, consult the agenda materials and know that your council has been engaged at a much deeper level to prepare to make policy decisions. All right, so we're going to talk about the tax levy, property tax levy, and the impact on public safety pension, particularly funding those public safety pensions. Public safety pension, what is that? That is part of the financial retirement program for our sworn police officers and firefighters, public safety pensions. Public safety pensions are regulated by the state of Illinois. They set up all the rules, they set up the system, etc. By law, those pensions are funded by the employees themselves with their own contributions and contributions from the village of Downers Grove. All municipalities are required to make what they call an ARC, an annual required contribution, putting funds into these pension funds to make sure they are financially sustainable and meeting state regulations. I am proud to say that for many, many years, the whole time I've been here, for years before that, and going forward, the village makes the annual required contributions. We traditionally funded that almost exclusively from property tax levy. Part of our long-range planning efforts, we take a multi-year look at the future costs of continuing to make the required contributions. We have an actuary put together a model that takes us from our current cost of contributions, which sits at $10 million right now, and then it's projected to go up to $20 million per year in 2040. Why 2040? That's the year that the state law addresses that they have to be at a certain funding level, nearly fully funded by 2040. In the last couple of years, the village has employed what we call a stabilization program or practice. We call it a pension stabilization assignment. That's fancy words for doing something very simple, which is using other sources of funds to lessen the burden on the taxes, the property tax levy, and to smooth the anticipated and planned future contributions or increases in those property tax levy. Let me explain a little further. In last year, although over the whole the annual contributions are absolutely increasing, they vary from year to year. And in 2023, we had an unexpected reduction in the ARC, annual contribution. It dropped by $415,000. But the council said, instead of levying in varying amounts, let's go ahead and collect that $415,000, put it aside, and use it to offset future increases. That was the beginning of our stabilization program. That stabilization program continued into this year, where we will pay for a $600,000 increase in the required contribution without raising the total property tax levy for this year. And we'll do that by using dollars collected both in 2023, that 415, and dollars earmarked and collected in the current year, 2024. So we're using a combination of money levied in previous years and money on hand to handle that increase. What we're presenting here tonight is a 5-year plan for the use and retirement of those funds in the stabilization assignment. When you look at the multi-year model in this next 5 years, that model projects that we will make $59.6 million worth in total of annual required contributions, right? $59.6 million. The plan we're showing here tonight shows that almost all of it would be from property tax levy, which has been our long-time practice, about $59 million of it. But it also shows the continued use of the balance of the assignment. There's about $622,000 set aside right now. We would use that $622,000 over the next 5 years as part of the smoothing and lessening program. That approach will, and we'll show you in a minute on the table, will lessen the total dollars levied in any given year, and it will smooth the annual increases that are projected in that model, so they're not varying. We are proposing to retire the stabilization at the end of 2029. Why is that? Well, we think that we have encountered a unique situation in 2023 and 2024 with some favorable revenue sources that we just think that situation is not going to continue, and if we wanted to continue to add money to the stabilization, we would have to be in a similar situation going forward. We think we did a good job of capturing that good financial performance and putting it to use where it saves taxpayer dollars in the future. And if we do find ourselves in that fortuitous situation, we have other demonstrated needs in other areas that we've talked about many times. This plan that we talked about, and I just explained, is shown in the report in a table, and it walks you through the 2 years I just talked about. We're looking currently and backwards at how we got to the stabilization, and then the 5-year look ahead. So I encourage everybody to look at that in some detail if you're interested. What it shows is the use of $193,000 of that stabilization this year. We just talked about that. And then it shows the use of the $622,000 over the next 5 years. And you'll see that that amount varies in this plan so that we can smooth the anticipated increase in the total tax levy. Really what we're looking to do is, if you look at that model, we're looking to try to keep the annual increases predictable and about the same, ranging between 3.5% and 3.9% a year. It's also important to note that when you see the use of the assignment in this column, this represents the amount that the total tax levy is actually lessened. It's lower than it would have been by that amount because we're using that money on hand to make future year's payments. So here it is in a nutshell. This 5-year plan to use and retire the assignment results in an increase in the total levy, exceeds the increase in the ARC in 3 years. So in 25, 26, and 27, the percentage increase in the total levy actually is a little bit greater than the increase in the ARC. But the other 2 years, it goes the other way. The increase in the required contribution exceeds the total levy increase. That is the essence of smoothing. Some years one is higher than the other. What you're trying to do is get it to be about the same. And then when you look at the whole 7 years that this program covers, here are the results. 2 years of a flat levy, i.e. no change. So there were 2 years, 23 and 24, where the total tax levy did not change. 5 years worth of smoothing. Years 25 through 29, again, trying to get that in a range of 3.5 to 3.9% total levy increase. And 6 years in which the use of the assignment actually lessened the levy. It's a lower tax levy than we would have had because we're using this money, and that happens every year 24 through 29. This is staff's recommendation to the council of how to best use the $622,000 we've accumulated in remain in the stabilization. We're happy to answer any questions or hear any comments that the council may have.
Thank you, Dave. So just to add on to that a little bit, I've been looking for ways that we could kind of help to mitigate the property tax increases that we're going to see, right? We're going to go from $10 million a year to $20 million a year over the next 16 years. In the 2023 drop in that arc, the actuarial required contribution, is driven by factors that are, I think, almost entirely, if not completely, outside of our control. It's a change in mortality tables, it's exceptional market performance, it's things like that. So it was most likely a one-time opportunity during this period. You never know. You might end up in a situation similar in the future. But the idea was that we know that the contributions are going up, right? I mean, we had a curve, I think, that was in response to the council questions that I must have left back on the dais, but it looks like this in terms of the contributions that are required. Thank you, Leslie. And if we could find a way to make that more manageable, even for a time, for our residents, this was one of my goals. And I think staff knocked it out of the ballpark with what we've put together thus far, and now we see the recommendation. For my part, I'm in full support of it, and I look forward to my colleagues' comments.
Ditto.
Ditto.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because we talk about a shell game with regard to the state, right, of where funds are, but we kind of do the same thing with public safety pensions. It's still part of our budget. But, using the pension stabilization will at least keep a consistent increase so people know what to expect rather than rely on the volatility of the markets and all of those other factors. So that if we even have to increase the other levy by a little bit to keep up with whatever the market decides, at least we're going to have these more consistent step-ups so that folks can manage expectations instead of having these wildly varying values. And I think that was the goal of this, right? Realistically, we still have to get up there. But this at least feels like it can provide people with a set of expectations that are a little bit more reliable when it comes to their own budgeting. So, yes, I appreciate this, and I'm in full support.
Chris?
Yeah, maybe a question, given Leslie's comment about keeping it smooth for our residents from a tax standpoint, doesn't that only hold true if everything else stays the same?
Yes, that is an important
That's a good point
to mention. There are so many other components of the total property tax levy. For the purposes of demonstrating the effects of the stabilization, we show that the other portions of the levy remain the same at $7 million.
Yeah.
You think, wow, is that actually possible? Is that likely?
Yeah.
Well, we have been on a run for several years prior to this that kept all those components at $7 million. This 7.4 is the year that we levied 415. The other component dropped, and so it ended up in total. Is this a guarantee? Absolutely not. Those budget decisions are made yearly, and there's so many other factors from what programs and policies the council wants to enact, cost of other things, so that gets made every year. Thanks for allowing us to point that out. But for purposes of demonstrating this, we're showing a flat levy.
That makes sense. I guess maybe the other question that I had is, if something were to change dramatically in a not good way, and going in the wrong direction, and let me also just say, like, we have an obligation, and this is a well-earned thing that we need to contribute to. So there's no motivation other than to fund it as full and as fast as we can in my book. However, if there is something that turns and are we committing these dollars, or is it just each year it's committed based on what we've modeled here?
We have to levy every year.
This is just a plan.
Yeah.
And the reason we chose a stabilization assignment versus a stabilization fund, the technical difference is the assignment just allows us to assign money. It doesn't lock it in. It allows the council to make annual budgetary decisions along as well.
Which is what you told us last time.
Because those are general fund dollars, right?
Those are general fund dollars. They are labeled or assigned within the fund balance, but we still have all flexibility and can be directed to use them in any way.
Okay, I'm good with this. Thanks.
That's fine.
What So I'm watching from home right now, I'm going, what does this all mean to me, right? So do we have that information? Do we have, so I've got a $400,000 property in town. You know, what's the impact to me going forward? Because that's what most of the residents are most likely to be.
And so every
concerned
year, when the budget comes out, we put that information in there, et cetera. If I had a better memory, I'd be able to say it right now, but I'm not gonna trust my memory. So next time when we talk about this, we'll put that information out there. But yeah,
Stay tuned for that budget.
we always show how much of a dollar per year the household.
I know we do every year, but since we're making a plan,
Yep.
I'd like to see what this looks like, you know, what's the plan, what is the impact
We'll do
on
that.
for this projection?
And much like those existing conditions memos, we take the council comments, and by the end of the summer, we'll have an updated plan, so we'll add that in there.
Terrific.
Very good.
Thank you.
Anything else? On to water.
I called my friend Jason to help me
What's it gonna be? What's it gonna be?
Oh, it's gonna be water fund sustainable.
Oh.
At least nobody booed.
Yeah, well.
I think I'll take curtain number
Yeah.
3, Mike.
Yeah,
right.
What do you think of public comments until all either?
I figured we'd do it at the end.
After we're done talking about this.
The next topic is water fund sustainability. We'll start with a little bit of background. The village owns and operates a very large and complex system that delivers clean drinking water, clean and safe drinking water to literally thousands of village residents and businesses and institutions, and some unincorporated properties as well beyond our borders. It's pretty obvious, but this system must be owned and operated in a way that's sustainable. And what do we mean by sustainable here? I mean financially sustainable, that the revenues will cover the cost of the system, and sustainable from an operating standpoint too, that the system will continue to function properly, actually deliver that safe, clean water. Revenues to pay for the entire water system come only from customers, the water bills. That's the source of revenue. So all the costs of this are paid for by the users themselves through water rates and their water bills. In the report that's included in the agenda packet, you will see that there are many, many categories of expenses, from the personnel expenses for the people who manage this and village staff, to the cost of buying water from the DuPage Water Commission, to the cost of maintaining pipes and hydrants and valves, et cetera. So in the report, you'll see there's multiple categories of expenses. So it's a pretty complex system in that regard. So why are we talking about this in terms of long-range planning? Well, there's been a couple issues that have recently come up that affect expenses, that are driving future expenses in this fund. The first one is the lack of IEPA loan proceeds. From the last several years, the village has been using low-interest loan proceeds from the IEPA to help fund our capital improvements in this fund. For years, it was nearly automatic that when we applied for those funds, we would receive it. But in the last couple of years, due to some increase in demand for the program and some changes in the policy of how those funds are loaned out, we unexpectedly did not receive the IEPA loans. And that happened in like 2023 in that era. So that means that we didn't have revenue come in that we expected, which caused us to defer some projects and develop a sort of a bridge plan, if you will. Council talked about, I think, that a couple of summers ago. The second thing that happened was the state enacting the Lead Service Line Replacement Act, which in a nutshell basically requires the water utility, that's us, to pay for the cost of replacing lead service lines over multiple years, starting in 2027 and going through the next 17 years, I think. If you're interested in that, you can click on the link in the staff report. It'll take you to the previous discussion of this just a couple months ago, where the council considered our first lead service line inventory and replacement plan. Both of these things are driving up expenses in the future. And so to address that and to make sure we have proper revenues for the sustainable system, we worked with a consultant to come up with a multi-year rate study, the recommended rates, to make sure we're sustainable. And that study, which is also in the agenda packet, in a nutshell basically says this: there should be a 9% increase in rates in 2025 and then again in 2026, followed by a 6% increase in 2027, and then 5% going out year after year. Where does that compare with our current annual increases? Those have been running at about 4.8% based on the last study that we did several years ago. So when you break that down and take a little deeper dive, you take a look at a typical household and their bi-monthly bill every other month, their bill. A typical household this year is paying $102, $103 every other month for that. And then you can see the recommended increases, 9%, 9%, 6%, and then 5% going forward. This is on a per bill basis, right? So that's what those rates look like in terms of a typical ratepayer. That's what we talked about in property tax payer. A couple of takeaways from that. In the report, you'll see a comparison of Downers Grove water rates to other rates for water in other municipalities in DuPage County. And we are right in the middle of the pack. And we expect, and it even shows in the report that even after the first year increase, we remain in the middle of the pack, about average. This year, as opposed to previous studies, we took a look at affordability and impacts on our residents. There are national affordability standards that talk about you should not have to spend more than 2% of your household income in a year on water. So that's the standard we're looking at. There's two metrics to compare that to. One is based on the median household income, and then to look at the 20th percentile in household income. And it turns out that these rates meet the affordability standards that we're talking about. They turn out to be less than 1% of the median household income and 1.6% of the 20th percentile household income. So they meet the affordability standard. One of the things to note, and sort of tying some policy issues together here, is these rates assume that the village will pay for not only the public portion of a lead service line replacement, but on a going forward basis, also the private portion. Our current policy right now is to pay only for the public side when we do this. So why does it do that? There's a couple of reasons. One is when our team dove into the cost drivers and what's responsible for these recommended rates, the incremental cost of the private side was not the key driver. Key drivers were things like the total capital project costs themselves, the cost of money. We'll talk about debt issuances here in a second. And so we found that that incremental cost was not a big driver of the proposed increases. We also know that federal and state dollars are available and likely will be available to the village of Downers Grove to help pay for these costs. And if the village takes advantage of those grant funds, then by law, we will have to pay for the private lead service line portion. Right? And so because of those two things, we assumed that there'll be a potential change in policy. That's what these numbers reflect. Mm-hmm. So speaking of that, in terms of recommended actions, the plan includes the following. We think we should implement these recommended rates in 25, 26, and 27, and go ahead and issue the first bond issue that's planned in this rate study of $13.7 million next year. However, we are recommending that we revisit these rates when we get into 2027, and then make sure these are the right rates going forward. Why is that? That's when we'll have final information on our lead service line inventory and replacement plan. So when those final numbers come in, we may have the ability to adjust these rates higher than this if we have unexpected increases in those costs, and a reduction if we see some of the costs of lead service lines going down. But we just don't have enough certainty right now to recommend all those years. So we're saying let's stick to the plan for the next 3 years and then revisit at that time. Staff thinks we should absolutely seek federal and state funding because that could be significant dollars that could cause us to maybe lower the increases, if you will, and not have such these exact rates. We think that would be a good benefit for us. And because of that, staff is saying that perhaps this council could consider paying for the private lead service line replacement, that portion of those lead lines. We're not saying you have to have that policy discussion right here and now. where I say it has to be immediate. But by the time we get down to 26 and 27, where we're finalizing that lead service line replacement plan, and as we seek federal dollars, there may be an opportunity to revisit that policy. Happy to hear reactions and comments on that recommendation now as well as part of this discussion. Our friend Mr. Michnick also has a background in water rates of all things that he brought to the table. So he's been a big part of this. I wanted to ask if we missed any key points in this presentation tonight.
All right. Thank you, Dave. I don't necessarily want to push anybody into a policy conversation they don't want to have, but you can count me in on paying for private lead service line replacements. Folks who are buying a home that has a lead service line didn't get to pick whether that lead service line was there. It's a collective problem, and I think it's one that we all ought to fix together. My 2 cents. Any comment, Danny?
I agree with you, but also I had a quick question in regards to like folks that are buying a home not knowing if there's a lead service line there or not. Are they going to still have the option, if we pay for it and we get the funding for it, are they going to still have the option to opt out?
Yes, they do. Under state law, they have the option to opt out. There's certain paperwork.
Okay. Mike?
Yeah, so wondering if there's any benefit to trying to encourage property owners, so for it to do things ahead of time, right? So the earlier the better. If it be kind of a win-win situation. One, maybe. So here's where I'm going with this. For instance, when we pull a permit in town, we automatically require people to upgrade, put in smoke detectors everywhere in the house, regardless of what you're doing. You're pulling the permit to do some remodeling. Boom, that's a requirement. If there's a lead service line there, should we make that a requirement in the project if you're doing something with the water, even if it doesn't bump you into the higher,
right.
You've got a 3/4 inch line and it's sufficient, but hey, you've got plumbing work going on, that lead service line needs to be replaced, and the village pays for the tap and to the B-box, but the client's responsible from the B-box back to the house, which is kind of the way we're operating right now.
Yep, yes, sir.
Yes.
So I think what we could do is, based on what I've heard so far from the council, there might be interest in having a further discussion about that policy. You may recall the last time we talked about this policy, we had all the different situations, scenarios, iterations.
Yeah.
We would bring back all those as a package deal, because that would be the opportunity to see if we wanted any code changes beyond this as well that could drive that. So when we bring it back, we'll put that on the table as well.
I think some of those, I'm looking forward to that, because I think some of those discussions happened before I was on council. So,
Yes.
but I was taking advantage of them with my,
Yes.
some of my clients were the first ones to take advantage of it, because I was on top of what was going on. I was following along what all you boy are doing. So,
We'll bring that back soon.
And then this is kind of just a wild sort of question, but is there a connection here at all between our environmental sustainability plans going forward and the way we charge for water? So I don't know. It's just we charge everybody the same for water, right? Is there some sort of, for instance, your ComEd bill? I mean, sometimes you get incentivized to, use less electricity at certain times of day or whatever.
Yeah.
So, just thinking out loud about that. Are there some things that we want to potentially encourage or incentivize, do different as it relates to our environmental sustainability plan, and how that ties to how we charge for water use?
Yeah, and our current structure is we have a fixed portion of the bill, which pays for the access to have the water system run past your house, and then a per unit rate charge of the water.
Depending on the size of your tap, too.
Yeah, considering the bigger the tap, the more your fixed fee is each bi-monthly period. We did have some initial discussions with the consultant when we exported the staff level different scenarios. What came forward was keeping the same structure, which does not have a variability in the usage rate based on time of day or how much of a user you are, all these
Whatever
things
that
could be in
variable
there.
might be,
So if that is something the council is interested, my initial reaction is we could probably bring that back as part of the environmental sustainability plan. And since Jason's kind of working on both projects, he could probably tie those together pretty well for us. And so if that's
Yeah.
something you're interested in, we could bring that up.
I think it could be interesting to look into, especially, again, time of day when you see people out watering in the heat of the day when it's 90 degrees out at noon.
Well, you're not
You know,
allowed
you're
to
not-
Do that
manage your
anyway.
water at noon.
Unfortunately, I have seen it happen.
Yeah. Well, that's,
I mean, we are going to have some
That's a
pretty
quarter.
waying policy discussions.
People
Yeah.
won't throw it
you
in
know, I don't know if time of day is the thing.
Yeah,
That was the thing that popped in my head, but
But it could be, yeah,
We'd have to see how the scenarios play out.
I don't know.
exactly.
All I know is that we've been doing it this way for a long time, and so I'm saying this seems like a.
If we're reimagining a lot of things, why not
Why
take a
not?
look?
Yeah,
Why not
think
just
about it.
rethink that?
And I know part of the reason why we're also looking at some of these rate increases is because overall, our water usage per capita is probably dropping, right?
It
Like,
is.
people are being more thoughtful about the way that they're using
1% a
water,
year,
which is
I
what
think,
we
right?
want,
Yeah.
right?
More
And
efficient
hope-
fixtures,
Yeah.
yeah.
And you
at the
hope
same
that
time, our
balances.
infrastructure needs to be replaced.
Right, yeah, well, exactly, and so you're hoping that that levels out for some folks, like, well, I guess I can decrease it maybe a little bit more, but realistically, yeah, I am fully on board with this plan, and also very on board with paying for the private part of the lead service line replacement. I agree, I think this is a community investment, and regardless of your ability to pay, you should be able to have access to clean water, so, yeah.
Chris?
Yeah, so just a couple of questions and maybe a comment. So the IEPA loans, we seem to no longer be receiving those. Is that like a permanent thing, or is that just something that we applied last year, we didn't get it, we're going to continue to apply and?
Yeah, under the loans that are available now in the current program, I think the odds of Downers Grove receiving those funds will
Okay.
increase.
And those are loans?
Those are
not
low-interest
grants?
loans, they're not
Okay,
grants.
so it's not really revenue, it's cash?
Yes, it's cash
Okay.
in that we would have to pay
Right.
off at a low
Find-
interest
and-
loan.
Or find another source at a higher interest?
Right,
Okay.
and so that is.
Floating a bond.
General obligation
Yeah,
bond issue,
right.
so that's
Okay.
what that is.
So I guess from the standpoint of the amount of cash that we've been receiving from those loans, what is that as a percentage of the overall that we pay for all of this water maintenance and all the
We have that
expenses?
off the top of our head, or is that a follow-up question?
Yeah, I don't have that.
Okay.
Got it.
So, is it 10%? Is it half? Like,
It's the loans have been based off of the capital improvement plans.
Okay.
There's a 5-year work plan that's put together, and then you apply through
5 years.
for the amount that you're requesting for those projects.
Okay.
So it's not just a percentage of revenues on an annual basis. It's
Okay.
really tied to the capital projects.
Got
It's
it.
a 5-year plan that we had put together, so we have that information, we'll get it to you.
Okay, so I would also be interested to know, so the way I must have misread the report. My understanding was that we weren't going to be able to get any funding, so that's why we have to maybe tap the public. No pun intended. But then I'm hearing that there are perhaps grants, and so I would also want to understand what those grants might offset
Yeah.
from a cash flow standpoint of the loans that we're not getting.
So let me give you a little broader
Yeah.
perspective. So the first thing is the availability of the existing low-interest loan
Yep.
proceeds to villages like Downers Grove. They are becoming more need-based.
Yeah.
And so, under the existing program, we're not counting on getting low-interest
Got
loan
it.
proceeds anymore. Going forward, when we get into the lead service line replacement era,
Yep.
it is our understanding that the federal government and the state government will make available grant funding
Yep.
and potentially low-interest loan funding to villages that have lead service lines in their town, and we have a pretty decent.
Yeah.
So we think under the current program, no. Under the future program tied to lead service lines, we probably do have an opportunity.
Right.
So that's why we're saying, seek federal and state funding for lead service line, but we're not getting funding through the traditional low-interest loan program, which was not really tailored to lead service lines.
Okay. So speaking of shell game, there is a little bit of like, not a game, but trying to figure out where that funding is going to come.
Yes.
What I'm trying to understand is what's the impact to the no loans? What's the potential on the grants to make a decision on this?
Yeah.
Tied to that, my second question, so you can find that information, right? Is
Yes.
that?
So let me answer
Yeah,
the first one.
okay, yeah.
So when we switch from debt financing
Yep.
from IEPA low interest loans
Right.
to general obligation
Yep.
loans, the interest rate will increase.
Of course.
I think we were paying around 2%, if memory serves,
Yep.
for the IEPA low interest loans from a couple years ago. The GO bond for a AAA rated community, it's not 2, it's gonna be higher than that.
Right.
So that'll be the.
So whatever the
quantitative
delta
difference
is
there.
there, right? That's
Exactly.
that's the cost.
Correct.
And then from the other question, because you mentioned that part of the recommendation for doing the private lead service line replacement was because the cost wasn't in that.
It wasn't a key driver.
Wasn't a key driver. So I interpret that as it's a much smaller part
Yes.
of the overall replacement. I think I would like to understand, and I in the document it said it's hard to maybe estimate that. I thought it said there was an average listed in the consultant's report, but I didn't see an average in there.
If you go back to the lead service line inventory that was presented earlier this year, there was some estimates provided for
Oh,
the
okay.
private side.
Any idea? Do you remember?
No.
Okay.
Put out though for you. Yeah.
Hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars?
Let's take a look. We'll
Okay.
get it for you.
So
That
yeah.
cost, right?
Yeah. So that to me is kind of a driver, right? We talked about it's sort of a community effort. If the vast majority of that is going truly to the public side of it as opposed to the private side, then it feels pretty straightforward to make the decision to move ahead. I would think it's important for us to know sort of what that
Yep.
might sit
We'll
at.
get you the details,
Yeah.
Chris, because we did have that information available to us when we recommended this. We saw that the number one driver was the overall cost of public improvements that
Yeah.
are needed in the system, and then there was some cost of money issues. So we do have it, and we'll get it.
And one of the couple other notes I made, it's not just a cash flow thing here, it's also how it impacts what our debt service, right, can be. So if we don't increase the rate here, we are at risk of having to borrow more expensively.
Correct.
Yeah. So I don't love that. And then again, I think the recommendation was pretty good at summing it up. I mean, we've got a system to maintain. We're uncertain on the funding, on how that's going to come. 9% is a lot. It feels like a lot. But the metrics around maintaining affordability made me a bit more comfortable with that. So that's all I had. Thanks.
Thanks for those
Yeah,
details.
thank you.
Mike?
Are we actually proposing, will we be doing the work on the private property, or is this a reimbursement to the homeowner?
We do the work.
We do the work.
State law.
Okay. And so that's kind of an unusual thing, right?
Very much so.
For us to be doing work on.
And
so
when we
is there-
say us, it's either our in-house crews or if we contract out with a village-paid contractor. But yes, this is one of the big changes in the Lead Service Line Replacement Act. These are village crews or contracted crews doing the work.
So you've calculated a cost.
Correct.
On average, with some sort of escalator
Yes.
over time. And, but if we're able to do chunks of this at once, there'd be economies of scale with that, right? That we might.
Yeah, there's so many drivers of what those costs will look like and opportunities to lower the costs when we get into this era here, starting in like 27. The municipalities that have about the same number of lead service lines will all be going to market at the same time to try to address, because the state law said if you have this many, you got to start in this year and get X% done every year. So we're going to have to understand what's going on in that whole market. Will we be in one of those situations where there's so much demand, right, that prices are going way, way up? Will the market respond with more people getting into that and increasing the supply of materials and labor, et cetera? Jason even was talking about, should we look at in-house crews? Because if we're going to have 14 to 17 years of predictable work.
Yeah.
Maybe it's cheaper to go. So there's a lot of policy issues baked into this discussion here when we start to revisit rates.
Thank you.
And just one more question. I think I know the answer, but I think it's important. The driver for the increase in rates is primarily this lead service line replacement?
That is a big driver, the whole idea of lead service line replacement is a big component.
Big component.
And then public versus private is the subcomponents breaking that. But also the capital projects that we need to do even without lead service line replacements, just to keep the system going. We replace about 1% a year of the whole
Yeah.
system. That's another big chunk.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
We really appreciate that. There's still a lot of stuff coming your way. This is the initial recommendation. It sounds like what we'll be bringing forward is updated plan with the more detail, and pretty soon putting on discussions of rate structures as it relates to environmental aspects.
So will that be our next step in terms of determining, like, policy on the rate increase?
We'd like the opportunity to see where it all fits in and what timeline, so I'll probably talk to you also individually and expectations and when you want to bring that forward and if it relates to this year's budget or not. So.
Thank you.
Any public comment with regard to the long-range plan updates?
I'm just chewing on it right now.
Thanks for sticking with us.
We're going to be chewing on it a little while longer, too.
I'm trying to learn here, but it's like, ooh.
Yeah, I've got some questions, next questions and comments, I guess. So I'll start with the water, since you're on the water board. You mentioned that the water rates affordability is calculated at that, but you didn't say on which year. Do you mean all the years?
Yeah.
Like to 29?
We actually looked out, so the rate study looks at 10 years, so we went all the way to 2034, and the percentages here on the board are the highest that affordability metric got in any of that 10-year period.
Right, okay. Thank you. And then have you thought about, sort of almost come up here, maybe tiered pricing so that the bottom, 20 percentile don't get more impacted? I'm basically thinking, all the new houses that have gone up, these people can afford a new house. The percentage on their income will be less, but you can't ask them more for their tax returns. So you can use a proxy of water consumption, in that.
You could bake it into the variable rate for how much water they're using, et cetera.
Right.
But the thing that's more closely tied to that, though, I think is the thing Mike was
tap
talking
size.
about, the tap size. Most of those bigger houses have a bigger tap size, so they pay a bigger fixed fee with their bill.
Yeah, but maybe there can be a better differential.
A family of six to pay more than.
To capture more, so the percentage load of income is the same for everyone.
Plus a new house.
And then with the water prices going up, I was a bit lucky. I've lived in places that had really cheap water. And I was kind of astounded. I calculated once it costs more to run the hose than it would to pump to run it. So water's pretty expensive. Would there be, I don't think there is currently opportunities to use your own water source. So like I would love to collect my rainwater and use it in my toilets, for example. Or I'd love to have a well in my yard to water my garden. And I understand they're both not available today.
I think there's some building and plumbing code issues that if Stan were still here, we could ask him about that, but I think you're right.
That's
Yeah,
state,
commercial
that's
buildings
state.
do that, but I don't think they do that residential.
State plumbing code.
Yeah, but you could amend you can make your own rules.
To be more restrictive.
To be more restrictive,
Like if you
yes.
think about all the houses that have got water pits, right? They could actually use that water to water their garden as well, because the pits don't empty actually. People I know who've got
For irrigation systems, I think there's ways to do that under the state plumbing code, but not for in-house gray water use. Mike can speak to that.
Right, but I think it's more to do with if you have them combined.
Right.
With
Yeah,
the
that's
potable
another
system. But if you were to install a separate system that's not combined with your potable system,
There are situations, it's nothing but commercial buildings. They won't let you do it in a residential building.
I've never I don't believe so, but I'm not 100% sure.
And you do have to run separate pipe. It's 100% separate.
Yeah. And then, wells. I'm just thinking ways to mitigate cost increases, because for me, water's really expensive. I feel that's really bad. And then to go to the ARC funding, I wondered whether, I didn't hear anything about funding that at least partially from service revenue. So, is any of it today funded from service revenue? And
So I'll answer the.
I can jump in, or go ahead.
So in 2023 and again in 2024, when we added money to the stabilization assignment, that some of that came from non-property tax revenues. It's sort of a labeling exercise. All the years prior to that, all the years I've been at this village, it has been 100% property tax levy funded. I'll check with Mr. Baker, make sure I'm correct on that. Yeah, we think so. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, and I was going to say, if I'll go ahead and channel Mayor Barnett, he would like to have a conversation about additional and alternative revenue sources for pension funding, but I don't know what kind of appetite there's going to be for that.
I mean, I'm just thinking about the bill you get. You know, it's normally a couple of $1,000s when you call 911 here. So I can't remember what the revenues are, but it must be a few million, I would expect, for these services.
Marijuana.
About the ambulance fees.
Ambulance fees.
Oh,
Could be, yeah, it could be.
The bill, yeah.
If you look in, you can see the breakdown, different revenues in our general fund. But traditionally, this council and previous councils have depended on the predictability and control of the property tax levy and go right into the, if you depend on other revenue sources, they vary based on economic cycles, and then you could be at risk of not being able to make your required contribution as the revenue sources go up and down. Did I capture that?
You're reviewing this every year, so you could make a pretty short-term estimate. Anyway, that was just on that one to consider that. I think that was, yeah, that was my questions. Thanks for answering.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Question regarding, I think, what Chris was asking about in terms of factors affecting these numbers. Does that include things like return on investment, for example?
It does, as Mayor Pro Tem Jose was talking about, there are so many factors that go into the actuarial models that calculate the annual required contribution. I think you rattle off several of them. And that's a good opportunity to note that these numbers here in the ARC, these multiple years out in the future, are just numbers in the actuarial model. We know that they won't be exactly that in each year because it'll depend on rate of return on their investments. It'll changes in other assumptions. But it's a pretty good roadmap for planning purposes.
How far out are they doing that number projection? Do they go all the way to 2040 or?
Yes, we asked an actuary a couple years ago to update a model that shows that all the way out to 2040 for planning purposes. Each year, both the police pension fund and the fire pension fund calculate their own individual annual required contribution that's precise for that year.
Are those numbers available somewhere for people like us?
Yes, we include them every year in the budget document with links to it. And also, you'll note that the 2025 required contribution does not have a little footnote saying it's in the model. That's because we just received those numbers. So that is a hard number that you can count on.
Dave, do we have history on this? For
Yes,
another,
yes.
So in other
There's
words,
a
to
graph
say,
in the report.
right? So you know, looking at past projections and how the actual lined up with the past projections.
Yeah, they got pretty close, except in 23 when it
A little bit.
varied.
But I'm just saying that we have a history of.
Until Springfield throws you a curveball.
Okay.
Yeah.
But,
that happens.
You know,
But
this
the
is the
actuals are
best,
pretty
this is the best we can do.
It's
in terms
really-
of making a projection.
It served us well for planning purposes. There's been a couple years where there have been significant changes either in state law or the way the actuarial community calculates things and best practices that have caused us to recalibrate the model. I think then Mayor Tully experienced that year, and it was a big change.
Do the models include any kind of scenario test, variable testing, meaning if the market does this, the impact is that, if the market does something else, or is that not the way they do the?
That's typically something the pension board of trustees would see, as opposed to us getting that. Did we run any stress testing like that?
I know that they look, as you just said, those boards look more closely at that. For purposes of us, when we asked them to do a multi-year model, I don't remember a detailed sensitivity analysis. There may have been, but I just don't recall whether it was built in there.
I have to believe it's baked in there somewhere, some of that.
Yeah, I'm sure
Like
there's
they-
a
pretty broad strokes.
stochastic modeling
their models
somewhere,
are
but
very sophisticated.
most often it's tied to the assumed rate of return.
The lane's pretty narrow that you can travel within when it comes to that stuff.
Yes.
Right.
You don't need to flip the
Including
board
investments.
if you don't want to. But I was curious in terms of your discussion about federal and state involvement with the new approach. And then I think it connects somewhat to my question in terms of how the village works. And I don't know if this is premature to ask, but is there an effect in terms of prioritization along the lines of what you were alluding to with regard to how the one program is going to need-based as opposed to whatever was the approach previously? Is need-based likely to become a central variable in terms of how either the state or the federal government operates in the new approach that you were discussing?
We don't know for sure, which is one of the reasons the staff is recommending and the council nodded to the whole idea of, let's see how those programs play out. Let's also see how our inventory plays out. What is our number, what are the costs? Because we just don't know yet.
Because along the lines of what you were suggesting in terms of the impact on the market, I don't know where Downers Grove stands. I don't know if you have a way of gauging where Downers Grove stands in terms of amount of lines that need to be replaced versus other communities, and then financial resources within those communities to replace those lines, and whether that's a factor or not. And then a related question I have in terms of how Downers Grove would actually implement it, given that you're talking about it as such a lengthy program. How will you determine, or am I early in asking this, who gets priority in terms of actually having the work done?
So David, and anybody else who's interested in this, you might want to do a read of that lead service line inventory and replacement plan, iteration number 1, which was discussed just a couple months ago, and I think it's even linked in this agenda material. So we have preliminary information that the council has seen on that. Every year for the next 3 years, we'll get more precise, and perhaps changes directed by this council might be made to that, but the plan speaks to all those things.
So you've determined a method already of who gets priority?
Yes, there was some, and there's even a little map, and it was the first iteration, first of 3 preliminaries before a final. So it's good that we're thinking about it, but it's going to change likely as we get more information.
Thank you.
All right. Any other feedback?
Not on this, but we, believe it or not, have one more thing for the.
Can I ask one quick question? I'm so sorry. With the water, I'd also be curious, because we're kind of in the middle of rates. Is there any way of kind of analyzing where we lie with regard to like our water quality as compared to a lot of those municipalities as well? And I don't know if that's a thing we can
the
measure.
water quality for all the participants in the DuPage Water Commission are going to be exactly the same because you're getting the same source.
Sure.
So.
That's DuPage.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
That's nice, Dave.
if we could, one last thing is, we've been speaking of priority action items in the long-range plan. We have a lot of projects on this council's multi-year priority action item work plan, and so we have taken to giving monthly updates on these projects. So you can see on this slide here, these are all the projects and priority action items that this council identified. The yellow line represents the ones that are active in this time frame according to our plan, which is most of them. And every month we put together a quick synopsis on where we are. Several of these have already been completed. You see them on the screen here. Those 4 have been completed. And here are the other status on all the other projects. Most of these are green in terms of they're on schedule. There's no particular issue. All the guiding DG stuff here in the middle we just talked about, that's going on schedule. Lead service line replacement plan is also, we completed that earlier. We're talking about tonight, that is on schedule, etc. Video gaming, we'll do more discussion of that in November once the results of the advisory referendum question are presented back to the council. There are 2 projects that we've identified as yellow, both of them related to schedule. We'll go at the bottom here first. One of our priority action items is to work with the owner of the Meadowbrook Shopping Center at 63rd and Woodward to facilitate a redevelopment, revitalization of that shopping center. We're working with the owner to create a tax increment financing district, and redevelopment agreement to provide some financial incentives. That project is still moving forward. It's been a little challenging to get all the details hammered out with this owner and the village staff and get their zoning submittals in. So it's still yellow, it's still going. It's yellow only because it's behind our initial schedule, but we're still working on it. In fact, we have meetings with that owner tomorrow. The other one that's yellow only due to schedule is our own Civic Center project. We are a couple weeks behind schedule. The good news is we started the staff move-in process today. So Village Hall departments are in the process of moving over to the new building this week. Our plan is to be open to the public for Village Hall departments starting on Monday. By the way, Village Hall will be closed on Friday to help us facilitate that move. And then the police department, the same routine in the following week. So we're aiming for them to be operational and open to the public from our new Civic Center building on Monday, July 29th. So if any of that changes, we'll let everybody know. And then in terms of moving forward, once we move in, then of course we have to complete the project, which has two more phases. One is the demolition phase. We have to demolish the building we're in now and the building that houses the police currently. And then once those are demolished, build the final aspects of the parking lot for this project. Slightly behind schedule there too, but we feel like we're in a good position to try to get all of that done within this construction season. So we thought we'd be done around September 30th or so. Now we're looking at around Thanksgiving timeline. That's our current plan. So we're a little behind schedule. Good news is we're on budget, so that is fantastic. The other part of this too is the sale and redevelopment of what we call Lot 2 to a private sector developer. Council has identified that developer through our competitive process as LCI Development Partners. They are also running a little bit behind schedule and getting their zoning entitlement applications in, and we're working with them on their redevelopment agreement. So they're also a little bit behind on schedule, and we look to have another update in a couple weeks on that. So that's, if you want more detail, each of these projects has a slide with next steps and et cetera. Due to the lateness of the hour, I won't go through it here today, but we did publish that as well. And finally, I think we have a video. Do we not?
Yeah, in the interest of time, I think we'll go right to the video that provides a little more information and visuals about the coming weeks as it relates to the Civic Center project.
The new Downers Grove Civic Center is nearing completion, and the village is currently transitioning business to the new facility. Village Hall will be closed on Friday, July 19th during this transition, and will open for business in the new facility on Monday, July 22nd, with new operating hours from 7:30 to 4:30, Monday through Friday. The police department is scheduled to open its lobby in the new building by the end of July. A portion of the site will still be under construction this summer. However, the visitors' parking lot on the south end of the Civic Center is open to the public and accessible from Curtis Street. Please follow the signs from the parking lot to the facility entrances. The community development and finance windows are located on the first floor. Administrative offices, including human resources, clerk's offices, and communications, are located on the second floor. The police department has a separate entrance in the new building. The access drive near the Washington crossing is restricted to police personnel only and not open to the public. Phone numbers and online transactions will remain unchanged. For more information on the new Civic Center, please visit downers.us.
We're happy to entertain any questions. Let's say we, Mike, who's the project manager, we're happy to answer any questions you have.
Mike, when is District 58 moving?
September timeframe.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, I, for one, can't wait to get over there. Any other questions?
They change in operating hours, 7:30 to 4:30.
Yeah, so that's an opportunity for us to adjust some staff work hours in a way that's a benefit to our staff, but we also were looking at the usage patterns, and we found that there's fewer and fewer people conducting in-person transactions. A lot of the folks that do are with the construction and development community, and they prefer earlier hours. I don't know if you know that, Mike. So it's a win-win. We think it's better service alignment and a big win for our staff members as well.
Excellent.
that, unless there's further questions, that would end the long manager's report.
Anything else? I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? This is 801 Burlington signing off. We are adjourned.